And we are live, ready here for the final day of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. Alexandra, it's it's the moment everybody's been waiting for, right? We will determine the winner, and if it's not Hikaru Nakamura, how do you think the chat's going to react?
I think that chat is still going to support him even if he doesn't win today. That being said, he is a favorite. So for the fans, this is going to be an exciting event to watch because he if you had to bet on someone, you'd bet on Hikaru, but it's still close enough that it's extremely interesting and can go either way.
For sure. And beneath us, we'll have the live board at all times. Right now, we have the last game of yesterday's match as we wait for the action to take place. But Hikaru Nakamura, Daniil Dubov, one match each. Hikaru won the first match, winning the first two games in that match. Then Daniil Dubov won the first game yesterday and drew the next three. Each side winning a close match. I don't know. I mean, I think that Hikaru still has to be the favorite based on his rapid skills, his online skills in particular. But Dubov played such a nice match yesterday that you got to give him a fighting chance.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think anybody is doubting that Dubov can do it. And we've seen some just incredible openings from him yesterday, his strategic performance. Um, I mean, it's just that they're both two fantastic players, and today is going to be the final day regardless. 1-1, head to head. They've been making this very interesting.
They have indeed. And I just can't wait for the next minute because that's when the games will begin at the top of the hour. And see everybody in the chats. Thank you so much. I mean, before we even get started, before our attention is drawn into the chess in particular, specifically, I should say, but I just want to thank everybody who's continued to tune in to make this such a fun broadcast, make the numbers, the viewership is at all-time high, record highs, and the moderators who have been dealing with the channels. Thank you so much for you all and for everybody's support, coming together as a community. It's been fantastic to see, and the party's only getting started because when today ends, when this final match of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge concludes, we do get the PogChamps in just a couple of days. And Alexandra, you've been coaching, you've been working with those players. How is their progress? What's it been like?
Well, I hope I've been able to guide them in the right direction, but I think the people who are going to do the best are those who have been putting the most hours by themselves grinding the game. So streamers like BoxBox, who I see playing chess every single day, making rapid improvements from 1,000 rated to almost 1,400. I think that a lot of the players, they're gamers, they're able to pick it up pretty quickly, and now it's just a matter of who is going to put in the most time until the event.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've seen plenty of the streamers take part. And not just that, they've been joining each other's streams. Like, I was awake way too late last night in BoxBox's stream, and there was Void Boy in there, and Yasuo was there too, and they were just like kind of messing around, and it's clear that they're having fun.
Yeah, they've been having fun, and I think doing practice games against each other is, I mean, it's a good idea because they're similar rating, but they're going to give away a little bit of their preparation so far. But hey, we have liftoff. So Hikaru starting off with the black pieces. Normally, he would be happy to get a draw in the first game and then try to start pushing with white. We have another English from Dubov, and we saw that yesterday as well. What are your thoughts on the opening so far?
Well, right now, Dubov's stolen upon c6, and we'll very quickly go through it just because the moves happen so quickly in the opening. And actually, maybe let's wait for a moment where they finally slow down. That gives us some time. If they're in a little bit of a think, we can go through it step by step. But we'll look at this live position after bishop to b7, where, okay, I was about to say maybe now we'll get a moment to check. But white is up a pawn here. That is what happened. Dubov stole this pawn that was in c6. He reroutes his bishop to a6. And the first thing that I'm seeing, Alexandra, is the white king side, and the light squares over there can be quite vulnerable.
Right, because he is so busy attacking on the queen side with his light squared bishop that he is not defending his king right now. But at the same time, if his bishop ever needs to hop back, and he can move his rook from f1 and bring it back to f1. So I think it's nice the way he's playing this very actively. Do you think Hikaru has enough compensation for the pawn here?
Compensation, that tricky word that every single player in chess probably dislikes because it's used as like, oh, there's compensation. And it's just this vague term of what does that really mean? I definitely think that Hikaru has compensation here. And it should be descriptive whenever you talk about compensation. We talked about the light squares over there on the king side. I also like the fact that the only extra pawn for white, that's, you've given up a pawn, is this pawn on d2. And as we saw Dubov with the black pieces in game one yesterday, I think Hikaru could have a similar plan of blockading that pawn, keeping this bishop on c1 as a permanently weak piece, as if it ever moves out the way, here comes a rook d8 and an attack on that pawn. So Alexandra, do you agree? Do you think that black has sufficient compensation, or is it not just compensation, but even more than that?
Well, what I like about Hikaru's position is that he is kind of trapping Dubov's pieces. So the bishop on c1, it's blocked by its own pawns. d4 cannot be moved yet because the knight on c3 is hanging. If the knight on c3 weren't hanging and he were to push d4, then he would end up creating an isolated pawn that Hikaru's pieces could all gang up on and likely win later on in the game. And then for Hikaru, his development is pretty straightforward. He's bringing his pieces to the open and semi-open files. So I like his position in the short term. If somehow Dubov is able to develop and, hold that extra pawn without making a huge weakness, then I'm definitely going to favor him in the endgame. But so far, it could go either way.
Yeah, I think the dynamic chances seem to be in black's favor. Just look at the coordination of pieces. White has two pieces developed, a knight on c3 and a bishop on a6. Black has this knight on b6, bishop on f5, rook on c7, queen on d7, all feeling like they're a part of the game, and the rook coming to d8 next. It's adding pieces into I wouldn't call it an attack necessarily, but at least into a position that's threatening things that white needs to keep protected. So I do like the dynamics here for black, but as you said, the longer this game goes on, the deeper it goes, and if black isn't able to get anything concrete, anything clear, as we get towards, let's say, a queenless position, that's where white's advantage can start making itself felt, because it is an extra pawn.
Fair enough. And looking at the clock situation, they're both over the 15 minutes they started with. So it seems like they're very familiar with this opening theory. Is this something that they've played before, or just a well-known line?
Well, it's a good time to check, because I think Hikaru and then Dubov will spend a bit of time, and we always have the live board underneath us. So let's start from the beginning here. We saw c4, e5 played by Hikaru, knight c3, and Hikaru plays the English from the white side, so he now is getting a taste of it from both colors. But we've seen this quite a bit from Dubov as well. Take on d5, bishop g2. It's that sort of Catalan-like bishop aiming on the long diagonal.
And what Hikaru is playing is one of the main lines here, because when your opponent plays something like c4, he's not directly putting his pawns in the center. So one thing that black tries to do and take advantage of is putting his pawns in the center as early as possible.
Right. And as the kind of dust settles, this pawn e5 is looking like a very good pawn there, just taking away the d4 square from white, and it's just a good pawn to have, very advanced. And so the knight went back to b6 just to avoid any sort of tactics in the diagonal. That would have been a problem, where if this knight moved out the way and this knight on d5 is under attack, there are just tactics to watch out for, which is why knight b6, castles, bishop e7, both sides developing naturally, trying to get their king to safety, a3, and b4. So clearly white going for an advanced position, trying to open up this bishop on g2 on the long diagonal, and Hikaru says go for it. Go for this b5 push, which now that the pawn on e5 is defended, black's knight can move without any consequence. And so b5, knight d4, and this is where we saw the trades, where the bishop is on f3, black sacrifices a pawn. Instead of tying the rook down passively, which we saw Hikaru do in previous games, he's changed his strategy and played c6, giving up material for activity. And I like the decision as we go to where the live game is.
I just want to go back for a second to the move b5, because I've been checking this with the opening book at the same time. Just because Dubov is so creative, I want to see where he tries to do things a little bit differently. So on move, after f6 on move 11, usually you see white going for moves like d3 here. b5 is much less common, and he decided to go for a more aggressive line here. So that's where they started going away from mainline theory.
And it's always good to mention when the players are starting to get into their own territory, at least down a path that that they're clearly choosing, instead of just going with rote memorization from the theory. And this b5 move, we have seen Dubov and Hikaru play into this line, and after the exchange on f3, rook b8 was chosen by Hikaru in some games. But the problem with this is he's been getting these passive positions that clearly haven't been to his liking. So he gave up a pawn directly, saying, I don't care about the material quantity right now. I care about the quality of my pieces. And after this trade, we got to where we started off today, where the bishop wrapped around to a6, and black has good pieces for that pawn. And queen e2 was the last. Was not the last move played. Sorry, bishop g4, attacking this queen. This bishop would love to get into f3, where it's menacing, threatening some checkmates. So, Dubov played a move. Alexander, let me ask you about this move, f3 himself. How do you feel seeing that move? Because it does feel like you're a little loose over there on the king side.
Well, I'm just refreshing my page, my game, because I think it hasn't been updated. Okay, got it. So f3 feels really weird because you're pushing one of the pawns next to your king after you already have so many weaknesses, particularly on the light squares here. At the same time, his king isn't getting that much less safe because maybe in the future he'll put a pawn on e4. So he's actually putting his pawns on the weak squares in an attempt to push away his opponent's pieces that can attack those squares. So, it has some positives and some negatives. I do like the idea with bishop a6, bishop b5, just repeating the position first to see what Hikaru wants to go for. But I imagine he's not going to go for a draw here since he is the one trying to push because he has the white side of the pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting. This little, attack the queen on d7, then go attack the queen when it's on c8, and that forces Hikaru's hand. Like, now my queen should move off. Do I want to put my queen on a8? Which often it does want to go to a8 because you're already putting pressure all the way down towards the white king. But there must be something that Hikaru doesn't like, or it's the first time this bishop a6 move has happened. There must be something that Dubov doesn't mind, I should say, about allowing Hikaru's queen to 8. Instead, back to d7. So, will we see a repetition here?
And how many times have we seen this position so far? I think this is going to be the second time or the third time if Dubov moves it.
So we start with this after bishop e6 is the first time we have the position. This is the second time we have the position, and actually, if queen d7, I think it's a draw because it'll just be.
Yeah.
Do you think Hikaru is going to take the draw here?
With the black pieces, I think it makes some sense. Because he's talked a lot about getting a draw in the first game with the black pieces and then being able to fight it with white. So I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for it. Okay, queen d7, and now it's Dubov's turn. Last time, bishop b5, and it's a draw. Oh, they drew.
They drew.
Sorry, you're right. It was after queen d7, this position. So the position has to repeat 3 times, chat, and it can happen at any point. So even if the bishop moves to f7 and then e6, it doesn't have to be a sequence. If at any point in the game the position happens the same 3 times, then it's a draw.
And it's good to see that happen, see that unfold, because people hear about it, they're like, wait, what does that mean? So let's go back after f3. Hikaru retreated bishop e6, and then we saw bishop to b5. So we're attacking the queen. And now it's a moment where we can reflect. Where you're right, Hikaru had the black pieces in game 1. Now he has the 2 whites of the remaining 3 games. He must feel confident about his chances, and objectively, that's a good result coming into the game. But now that we're here, Alexandra, do you see any other moves, or maybe see why Hikaru chose not to play on? And same thing for Dubov. Like, why did they go for this repetition?
So the other move we were looking at was queen a8, and I agree with you. That's the most interesting one because it's kind of like you're fianchettoing your queen. You're putting the queen on the long diagonal. It's also a safe spot for the queen. And what I look at is the 2 bishops that are doubled on the open e file, and I wonder if a move like d4 might have worked here. No, it wouldn't because the knight is hanging, but in the future. So maybe he didn't want to play against the extra pawn because he thought Dubov would have a chance to open it. Other than that, I don't see anything direct that's too scary. Maybe a4, a5, trying to kick the knight back into a passive position.
Yeah, and I like how you frame that, though. I don't see anything direct that's too scary. But on the flip side, Hikaru probably didn't see anything direct for himself that would put fear into Daniil Dubov. And that's where this tension is that black is down a pawn, which, of course, means white is up a pawn. But what does an extra pawn mean? Is it useful right now? Doesn't really feel like it. But where is black going to push forward? So we talk about this all the time. So I'm going to toss all the questions back to you, which are difficult to answer. If you gave black a couple reasonable free moves, not like, oh, bishop c4, take your queen, haha. If I gave you like some reasonable moves going forward, what is your plan?
What is my plan here with some reasonable moves? I mean, it's a tough position to play for either side. I think that's the point you're making, and it's very fair. White's pieces are somewhat stuck, and black already has his pieces on all of their ideal squares, and it's not clear how they should continue.
Yes, I mean, I just put these pieces in green from the two bishops on the e file, both looking like they're on the pretty optimal squares. The rook on d8 controlling one semi-open file, the rook on c7 controlling an open file. So black's pieces are well placed, which means that we look at white. White's pieces are not so well placed, but how do we improve them? Maybe we play rook to b1. Maybe we play pawn a4, as you said, which also can go to a5, or allow my bishop to a3 to trade it off. So I think ultimately that without that clarity, both sides were like, I don't really feel any sort of confidence in my position. I think that it can go either way. And because there was a direct attack on the queen, that Hikaru said, I feel a little forced into this. I don't want to make any concessions here. And queen to a8, keeping the queen away from the center on d7, where if we just go back a little bit here, the queen on d7 puts pressure on d2, keeps the bishop on c1 stuck. So there's a clear understanding of why that queen is there. Whereas on a8, it aims at the king side, but it does allow white to complete development with respect to this bishop on c1.
Well, how do you think Dubov feels? So he got a pretty quick draw with the white pieces. Do you think he's happy with this, or he wishes it would have gone a little better?
I think he wishes for more because he keeps playing this line, and it's the line that gave him his first victory over Hikaru in the first mini match in Game 3. And so, there's something he likes in this, but it's probably the bind that he's had in some of the positions. Whereas in this game, Hikaru, if we go back to that decision once more, as you point out, b5 by Dubov, it's not the typical move played when people reach this position, but he has been choosing it. And after this knight d4, and we see the trade on f3, there's that decision once again, and Hikaru's dealt with it with, instead of c6, playing rook to b8, and you can already see the big difference between what happened in the game, where black gave up material, versus keeping the material and having a rook that's behind a pawn that can't move, and Dubov went a4 and a5 that first time. It was just a much more advanced position for Dubov, whereas black is sort of sitting and waiting for the action to come to him.
Yeah, it's one of those openings where they have played each other in it a few times, so they've both had time to look deeper into it, kind of learn the main ideas. So it's even harder to trick their opponent because they're not just a super grandmaster, they're a super grandmaster who has prepared this variation.
That's right. You're not just going against the player, you're going against the engine that the player has used to prepare.
And maybe their second as well, who has helped them look at this line. Just a lot of home preparation here.
And for Hikaru, I mean, I'm so interested in this c6 choice, and hopefully if we get him for an interview later, we can ask, because it is such an important decision already on just move 13, because you're sacrificing the material and changing up the trajectory of the game as it's gone these past few days. So I think it's a good choice, stylistically, for Hikaru especially. I don't think he, or really anyone, likes to sit in passive positions and defend, even if the engines is completely equal. It's much more comfortable for people to have a clear plan, some clear play for the pieces, and play actively.
Absolutely. So it'll be nice to get his thoughts on that. Giving a pawn in the opening at any point is something that you want to ask about, especially when you're no longer in a theoretical line. But moving forward, Hikaru is going to now have the white pieces against Daniel Dubov. I think they have a 10-minute break, you guys, and they're going to have at least another 3 games. If it ends up being tied, we'll see them go to Armageddon once more. Robert, do you think we're going to see an Armageddon today? What are you hoping for?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if my nerves can handle it. I mean, I'm not really nervous about it, but remember that, well, how could you forget? When Magnus and Hikaru played, and then that rook was dropped, and we were just freaking out. I came here to be calm today. Look at me, I'm in a dress shirt. My Ninja Turtle t-shirt is over there. I even did laundry. I could wear it again, but I chose not to.
Wow, Robert, some pretty big flexes.
I did laundry. You know me. I mean, I take care of myself sometimes. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, I miss it. I miss wearing just the t-shirts, the graphic tees. Free me. I see people saying free the chat. Free me. I want to go back to my t-shirt wearing days.
Well, Robert, you will be able to go back to it pretty soon. This is our last day of commentary on the event, since we're already in the championship match. And we'll see if, we'll see which title wins this prestigious part of the tour. Who do you think it would mean more for, Hikaru or Dubov?
Dubov, for sure.
I was kind of leading you into that question, but go for it.
Well, Hikaru himself said the big thing was beating Magnus in the match. I mean, that was monumental for him. And also, Hikaru has, he wins a lot. Let's put it that way.
You don't say. Hikaru wins a lot. Let's see what, Robert?
He reached number 2 in classical chess. I believe that was in 2016, just behind Magnus Carlsen. He's won major events. Daniil Dubov is somebody who's super talented and has won the World Rapid Championship. But I feel like people can't name as many victories. And actually, I think I have his card somewhere here, so I can...
Yeah, let's pull it up.
Bring that up. Yeah, here we go. There it is. So Daniil Dubov, he's 24 years old. His classical rating, standard, is 2699. His rapid ring is 2770. And you see his list of accomplishments here. That's still amazing stuff. I don't want to take anything away from him. He's very young. He's has way less experience than Hikaru does. But he, of course, because of some of that, and he doesn't have the same list of accomplishments as somebody like Hikaru. So I do think that this would be a tremendous victory for him. He already beat Ding Li Ren and Sergei Karyakin head-to-head in matches. So adding Hikaru Nakamura to that list, I mean, you couldn't ask for more.
I can't disagree with you there, Robert. And while we're on the break, maybe we could share some of the players who are going to be participating in the upcoming PogChamps so people know what other events to look forward to.
For sure, we have a few moments. So to remind everybody, that starts in June 5th. That's 2 days away. It kind of rapidly approached. I felt like this was still a couple weeks away, but it starts in 2 days. So for the streamers who are playing, and we've already listed some of them, but we can show some more. Let's talk about... somebody that I remember you coaching. Have your coaching been with Nate Hill? How's that been going?
Well, Nate Hill is really good at calculations. I've been really impressed with how quickly he is able to see some of them. I think he is going to be the lowest rated in his group. I think his other participants have played a little bit more, but in terms of his progress, I've been very impressed.
All right, and what about Tyler's brother over here?
I haven't done any training sessions with him yet, Robert, but I'm going to get in touch with him and see if he has any time before he starts his game.
He has Rob in his name, so I feel like we got to root for him. But we also have a next game. So before we go on to more players, we have liftoff in game number 2, where Hikaru and Dubov, now Hikaru gets the white pieces. We have a tied match thus far. We'll see how this game continues.
Okay, so we have a Sicilian... an open Sicilian here, and you talked a little bit about it last time, saying that it's an opening where white has more space at the start, but if you ever trade off a little bit, black is so solid that you tend to see, late middle game, end game advantages for black here. And here we have a queen trade option. How should Hikaru evaluate that?
Well, black on the move can trade queens on D1, as you said, and it's never too easy of a choice, because even if the queens come off, it's not like there's an easy follow-up necessarily for black. And look at this bishop on c8 in particular. That bishop has nowhere to go. If you go to e6, I'll capture you on e6 and force you to have these double isolated pawns. That doesn't look good. You can't go to f5. You can't go to g4, which means that you have this d7 square, but if your bishop can only go to d7, it might as well stick on c8. It's not doing anything on d7 either. So I think that white's piece placement is the reason why Hikaru is happy to go to an endgame, even if objectively the position's okay for black. But let me turn the question right back on you, Alexandra. Would you feel comfortable on the black side with the queen trade, or would you prefer to keep them on?
Well, I always feel a little bit more comfortable with queen trades. That means that, I'm not going to blunder my queen. We're just going to get them off the board, and it's going to be a fantastic game. Honestly, if chess.com wanted to remove them, I would not be against it. No, but on a more serious note, it would just depend if I want to keep the complications on a little bit more. Of course, trading off queens doesn't mean that the game equals a draw. But as white, if I am trying to go for, some type of attack here, I feel like I have a better chance with the queen on the board. If Dubov does trade off, he is giving up the open file for now. But I think Dubov would be happy with the draw. So if he thinks that it reduces some of the complications and that he has a plan for development, I would go for it.
It's funny, though. First of all, I just thought of this. I think that chess.com, instead of removing the queens, they should make a variant of chess where they're pawns and all queens on the first rank. I think that would be perfect for you.
Oh, that would be chaotic, Robert.
I mean,
I don't know how I'd feel about that. I mean, when there's so many queens, all of their value reduces. So I guess that would be all right in terms of just giving them up for free.
That's what I'm here for. So I'm here for like the continued Botez Gambit, and that way, if it's accepted once, it still can be accepted again. But anyway, about this position, reducing material often is seen as like, wait, now my position is safer. But one of the reasons why I feel like it may not necessarily be safer for black to trade the queens is you look at this bishop on e3, it stares down to this pawn on a7. So I just feel like white's pieces are better placed. This bishop on b3 hitting f7, and importantly, as I mentioned, this bishop on c8, it will not have an easy time developing if we trade queens. For now, bishop d7 is, you can develop there. It doesn't look good. It's not particularly useful, but you can play that move. But let's say you trade queens first on d1. Now you can't play bishop to d7 because the only defender of your bishop is this knight, and I can play e5 right away, which attacks your knight, kicks it off the square, and at the very best for black, you're just losing a pawn, which is, of course, not a good thing.
Yeah, that makes quite a bit of sense here. But I do see that Dubov is finally getting into a time sink here. So in the past game, they were both over 15 minutes on, move 18 or so. Hikaru 16 minutes on his clock right now. Dubov is the first to start and think here, so he must be considering his options between queen takes c1 and queen c7.
And it's really not an easy choice, so I think he's wise to spend the time here. But it's kind of funny. I feel like these players, even though they've had 2 matches already, they're still trying to feel each other's style out. Like, does Dubov want to get into a queenless position where he knows he's going to be worse? Can he defend that? It's the other game that we just saw, Dubov went for a position that he felt comfortable trying to do the same thing, get the squeeze on, and Hikaru said, no, let me be creative, let me get some aggressive opportunities. And so they're really trying to like mix and match and figure out what suits them best, but at the end of the day, I feel like they're both trying to get what the other wants, and neither side is acquiescing.
And you don't think that they're familiar with the other person's style just from having watched the other participate in past events?
And they played each other many times, but that's the
Right.
cool thing about these top players is they can change their opening every single game.
Mm-hmm.
If Dubov wants to, he can play the Scandinavian, and he did that against Karyakin. Who would have expected him to play the Scandinavian? But, well, I think we could have expected Hikaru to do what he just did after Queen c7 was played. You said attacking chances look real with queens on an f4. So, Alexandra, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but are you liking White's position more now that the queen stayed on the board?
I am liking his winning chances. So if, say, Dubov plays something like rook d8, bringing his rook to the open file, the white queen is looking towards that f3 square, bringing the queen closer towards the king, maybe even castling kingside and continuing the attack. I think this is the kind of position Hikaru would love to get in a position where he should be the one pushing with the white pieces. Not pushing too much to the point where he gives Dubov chances. That would be very scary. But I do like what he's going for. Let's see if it's going to work out.
Yeah, it's an interesting moment right now, too, because that with playing f4, probably White wants to play e5 and have a pawn chain, which also attacks his knight on f6, gains more space. And Black can play e5 himself to say, you're not going to play e5, I'm going to stop it, but he plays b5. But what I was going to say was, if he had chosen e5, watch out for when this f file opens and I get a rook on f1, because behind that knight on f6 is this pawn on f7 that's actually quite vulnerable. And you see the evaluation, if in the case of e5, it was feeling a bit shaky for Black, and that's why after b5, e5 played, it's still thinking, trying to figure out, who is this better for? I think White is better, but now Black is countering with his b4 move. Nice move.
Right. And it's going to be awkward for Hikaru because he has to put his knight on a4. The knight will try to hop towards c5 in the future, but maybe even if he hops to c5, Dubov will be able to push him back with his own knight here. So in this position, Hikaru is either going to get a pretty good attack, get an advantage here, or Dubov is going to be able to fight off his attack. And then when pieces are a little bit traded, you notice that Hikaru's pawns have been overextended on e5 and f4. Sure, you could argue that we'll still have Dubov's on the queen side, but extending your pawns where your king is always more dangerous.
That's true. And it frees up, let's say, the light square. So this bishop on c8, I talked about earlier how it really couldn't do anything. Now it can come to f5. Now it can come to a6. So there's actually more room for this bishop. And I just want to take us back a quick second, because after e5, most people would probably move this knight out of the way from f6. But b4 was such a nice move, because if you take on f6, I'm not going to take your knight on c3 right away, because if I take your knight on c3 right away, then you take the bishop on g7, and white ends up a piece. You see the engine evaluation bar shooting up for white. And because you have an extra bishop, as we can see here. Two of these bishops, and you can't attack them. But instead of after the b4, if you took on f6, black just takes back on f6 with the pawn, opening up this rook to the bishop on e3. The knight on c3 is still under attack, and there's no way to move the knight to defend the bishop. So you are going to lose your extra piece right back, and your king is unsafe. And so black would be in a great position, as you see the evaluation bar clearly in black's favor.
Well, in the current position, Dubov will have the option of taking the bishop on e3 and trading off the bishop pair, which, most players tend to like. At the same time, that knight on d5 is a really strong central piece. So maybe Dubov could also consider just defending that knight, because it's doing a great job at blockading the bishop on b3 from putting pressure towards f7. That being said, it seems much more intuitive for Hikaru to continue his kingside pawn march than for Dubov to do that on the queen side.
That's true, because of this committal decision b5 to b4. If you could push this pawn back to b5, and all right, the knight on a4 would be under attack, but more importantly, the c pawn feels like it could rush down the board. But because currently white has the c5 square under his control, it seems like your b pawn is moved, and that's great, but your c pawn can't join the party. And as you were pointing out, white can play h4, h5, or g4, and a combination of these aggressive plans. But you keep making this point, and I really think that this is a position that shows it. You start pushing all your pawns too far, it can really backfire, especially with your king still in the center.
Right. And here I wonder, where is it better for Hikaru to castle? Because at first, I keep thinking castle kingside makes the most sense. It seems more safe because black doesn't have his pawns there. But castle queenside could also, allow him to push his pawns on the kingside further.
Yeah, castling queenside, it's in the spirit of the attack. But if you sit and start really going deep and not just calculating the next couple of moves, but if Hikaru is like analyzing, let's say, 10 moves down the line, he may recognize that his attack won't actually pick up much steam. And if that's the case, then the king on the over there on the queen side on c1 could be a victim to an attack. So it really has to choose, not just for this current position and what he feels like doing, because he definitely feels like castling queenside and attacking, but what actually will pan out for him. And it is a tough choice, because I'm not sure myself. I'm just trying to speculate and try to give the thought process. What is it like? It's not just, oh, I want to attack, so let me go do it. It's, will I be able to play h4? Or let's say, black plays a move, rook to b8, just a random move, and white plays h4. And even if you've already castled queenside, can black just play h5 and take care of all these light squares? Like, is that a possibility for black, just to say, you're not pushing g4? It's not going to be easy for you because my bishop on c8 covers these light squares.
Okay, so then let's say that Hikaru isn't going to be able to get a kingside attack. Still, castling on the king side, he's still castling on the side where he's pushed his pawns more. Where is his king safer, with the idea that he's not planning on pushing more pawns?
I would say the king can be safe on the king side because you can start pushing your pawns on the queen side. One of the downsides from black's point of view of having this pawn on b4 is white can play c3 and force open the c file, or play a3 and force open the a file. So because you've overextended on the queen side here, white now has an opportunity to initiate a pawn break and open up one of these files for the rook. So I'm actually thinking that Hikaru wants to play for rook c1 and c3, because if I can take on b4, or you take me on c3, then my rook has a pawn to stare at back there on c6.
I like the plan you're talking about, but Hikaru did just castle queenside, so he is going for some frisky business here.
Oh, I'm eating my words. What can I say?
No, both strategies would have worked. It's hard to predict what he's going to do at some point. I really like e6 as an idea for him here, so I imagine that Dubov probably wants to play e6 right away and stop that option from ever happening. Oh my gosh, does Dubov only have 6 minutes?
it seems that's the case. Hikaru's moving at this, just every single response immediate, and Dubov thinking every turn. Queen a7. Okay, he really wants to get those queens off the board.
Yeah, Dubov is not having any of this attack. So if Hikaru wants to keep his queen on the board, actually, I also like the move queen c5 because he's not trading right away. And if Dubov really wants to trade queens, then he's going to have to do it while also activating Hikaru's knight. And then that pawn on c6 is going to be stuck in place, not being able to protect other pawns or be protected by pawns.
You've suggested many great moves throughout all of our coverage over the years. That is probably like the classiest move.
The classiest move? I know.
It really is an amazing move. So Alexandra's point, and we do talk about this, is you only want to trade if it benefits you. So why should I take you on a7 if I can make this move queen to c5, which attacks the pawn to c6, and if you take me, now my knight gets into c5, and look at how strong my knight is here. It's kind of like an outpost, despite not really being one just yet, because how do you attack the knight? You play e6, bishop f8. It takes you some serious time, and anytime you play e6, look at your remaining dark squares, d6, b6. I mean, it just f6 if you move your bishop to f8. So I really like that move, queen to c5, and I'm really hoping that Hikaru plays it, even if there are other good options.
Right, because even if Dubov would play bishop f8 and attack the knight could then hop to e4 and look towards f6 and d6. I mean, the knight is just such an impressive piece in this middle game, which is unique because you're playing against the bishop pair, and it's a semi-open position. It's not that closed off, but it's more like the knight is better able to hop around the pawn structure, and it gets into the center so quickly.
Yes, indeed. And I really, really like that move, queen c5. Maybe the one potential downside before I get too attached to the move is queen c5. Am I really threatening to take you on c6? Because that opens up the c file for black's rooks, which isn't the end of the world for white, especially because the bishop on b3 is so nicely defending in addition to attacking. But I am wondering, if what the follow-up will be. Probably rook to d2, rook to d1, something like that. But I don't want to just be all in on a move without really thinking about how it changes the position. But I do really like it.
Right, because maybe Dubov doesn't even have to take the queen right away, and he can just... So you said he wants to open the c-file, so maybe he can move his bishop out and then try to bring a rook to c8 if the c6 pawn is ever captured.
Yeah, bishop a6, that way if you take, as you were saying, there's a rook c8 stuff. Same deal if you take my pawn a5. Like, I'm actually kind of happy to give you that pawn, because then your king feels less safe. Your knight on a4, it's on the rim of the board, it can be attacked. And if your queen moves out, there's sometimes queen e3 check. Right? I'm not just giving you free pawns. What's your queen doing on c5? It's offering a queen trade, but not just that, it's blockading the diagonal. And I think we forget about that sometimes. Oh wait, I don't just need to trade queens. I actually am stopping your queen from becoming more active. But I do like this move, bishop a6, and it becomes a really strategic struggle where white is trying to control the dark squares on the queen side, is doing a great job of it. But maybe back on the king side, you brought our attention to this earlier, this f4 e5 configuration can be vulnerable.
Yeah, this is a move that much more holds attention because Hikaru could also play queen takes a7, rook takes a7, and queen c and knight c5, which is a similar idea, except that the position is a little bit more simplified.
Right. And the rook on a7 could potentially be useful here, where it could swing back to towards the king side, towards the center of the board. The bishop on c8, maybe it doesn't know exactly where it wants to go, so sitting on c8 can be useful to stop a piece from coming to d7, to stop any kind of e6 stuff. And this f4, e5 configuration with bishop h6 on the docket, or even g5, trying to undermine the protection of the pawn on e5, these kind of ideas are available to black, even though white's position is certainly better in this endgame. So I think no matter what, if Hikaru trades queens, he'll be happy, he'll be pressing, but it's not clear where he'll land that decisive move or have that decisive plan.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that Hikaru has a slight advantage here, just in the sense that it seems easier for him to play, and he feels like the one that is pushing. But it's one of those advantages that isn't large enough for Dubov to not be able to try and hold it or defend, or even get counterplay if Hikaru's not careful.
That's right. And I'm waiting here to see what Hikaru is going to do. He has plenty of time, so actually this is a really good moment to spend the time, because we saw Dubov avoid the queen trade before, and maybe now it's Hikaru's turn to say, actually, with queens on the board, if I go queen f3 here, I have good attacking chances with g4, h4, f5, all these kind of things. And that's likely why Hikaru is so deep. I thought he plays queen to e4.
He plays queen e4. Okay, that's different than what we expected, but it also makes sense. He's putting pressure on c6. He's also supporting f5 if, say, Dubov makes a move like, okay, bishop e7 looks like a silly move because of bishop d7. But okay, if the bishop goes to a6 at any point, which does look like it could be an option, then all of a sudden f5 is quite annoying for him to deal with.
Definitely. If I can get f5 through and just start punching open the f file and using this bishop on b3 to its greatest potential, that can clearly be bad for the black king. And
Robert, just one second. I'm turning off the heater.
Okay, no worries. So bishop f5 was chosen by Dubov, which attacks this queen on e4. And this queen on a7, I mentioned this a little while ago, it may just dive right into the white king side with a queen f2 type of move. So Alexandros, you're back. I'm kind of trying to figure out here, how exactly is Hikaru going to continue? Because after bishop f5, if you start taking me on c6, we talked about this. The open c file can give black real counterplay, not to mention the queen can jump into squares like f2 and e3.
Yeah, queen e3 looks really tough to deal with there, because then black is at least capturing a pawn back on f4, if not also doing it with tempo and playing rook ac8 first. So maybe he doesn't want to take on c6, but if he doesn't want to take on c6, what about... Okay, queen c4 always looks like a fun move because it has a nice threat on f7, but then there's bishop e6, which I'm not too crazy about, because it seems like it's just pushing the queen away and offering to trade the bishop on b3, which when white would recapture, would mess up his pawn structure a little bit.
Yeah, I think, though, we're getting into a potential endgame where if we see a bishop trade, right? Let's imagine bishop e6. Okay, looks like a good move. Queen c5. Bishop takes b3. Now I can trade queens, and I just want to show something here. I might take with my c-pawn, which is capturing away from the center, but you have this backward pawn on c6. And the larger point that I was going to address is the knight is on a light square, which means it can never be attacked anyway, because black only has a dark squared bishop. So in certain endgames, or just, positions with two rooks and this bishop versus knight dynamic, the knight controls all the light squares, and there's literally nothing black can do about it.
And, okay, so we have some progress. Queen c4 was played, putting pressure on f7. Dubov responded with queen e3 check, a very forcing move. The king shifts on over, and then he plays bishop e6 to defend f7 and attack the queen. And now we see Hikaru offering the queen trade. So we might go into this trade-off that you were talking about.
So it becomes evident that Hikaru was trying to induce a trade of the light square bishops, which honestly, at first, if we just go back quickly to this position, let's say after white went queen e4, it's like, why would you trade off this bishop on c8 for this beautiful bishop on b3, which is attacking the f7 square? The bishop on c8 is doing absolutely nothing. But this is a long-term understanding of the endgame, of the position without the queens, without the bishops, that the knight can jump from color complex to color complex, and the bishop on g7 is actually locked in behind the pawns. So as we get to the live board after the trade on d4 here, Hikaru's saying, okay, let's do this. Take me on b3, and I could take with the a pawn or the c pawn. I'm not sure it. It does change how the position looks with this rook coming to c1 after c takes b3, but ultimately he's claiming that the knight is better than this bishop on g7, which is stuck behind this white pawn chain.
Right, and two bishops versus a bishop and a knight, they're much more powerful, but a bishop versus a knight in this endgame, where you can only control one color, like you mentioned, you're not able to go from color complex to color complex, is definitely not as advantageous. And Hikaru is also the one who's getting on the open file first. So, maybe he decided to just go for the endgame strategies. That's a very impressive understanding.
And I just want to shout out to Nicola for the cheers there. Always so supportive of chess channels, and really appreciative of all your support.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicola, for everything you do.
And rook a to d8 played by Daniil Dubov, challenging this rook on d4. And it just begs the question from Dubov's point of view, wait a second, aren't you allowing white to take on e6 and give you this horrendous double pawn structures. Let's say rook takes d8, rook takes d8, bishop e6, you have to take with the pawn. And now look at this pawn. These two pawns here on the e file look bad, but black has obtained control over the d file. And this bishop on g7 looks not good, but it will come to h6 and you'll play g5 and you'll try to just spring that bishop free.
Yeah, it's a very unpleasant looking pawn position at first glance, but it's one that, might be able to be fixed a little bit later on. So I see where you're going with that, which is probably why Hikaru decided, you know what, I would rather have the open file than mess up your pawn structure, because that just gives Dubov too much counterplay here.
And
although with 3 minutes on Dubov's clock, do you think maybe Hikaru should be pressuring him into a more complicated position like that one? I guess it doesn't matter anymore.
I think the clarity would have been what made Dubov's life easier. If the bishops were traded, and we hear that Forsen is asking about the ratings. What are these ratings based on? So these ratings that we see next to the players' names, Dubov 2770, Hikaru Nakamura 2829. These are FIDE rapid ratings. FIDE is the World Chess Federation. And so these, based on the tournaments over the board played by these players, their ratings are 2770 for Dubov and 2829 respectively. And shout out to Forsen, who is taking part in the PogChamps event and has been watching this our coverage and Hikaru Nakamura versus Daniil Dubov and Hikaru's previous matches. So shout out to you, Forsen.
Yeah, thanks so much for continuing to watch, and hopefully you've been guessing the moves alongside us as well.
And back to the point you're making. This rook on the d file looks great, but you said, will Hikaru try to pressure him on the clock? That's exactly what he is doing, and I think that by leaving more pieces on the board, sometimes it's a regrettable decision, because if black has more pieces, you can stop some of white's plans. For instance, this rook isn't getting to d7 anytime soon with a bishop on c8. But at the same time, you have more pieces yourself, so perhaps this bishop on b3 will go to a4 at the right moment to attack this pawn on c6, which wouldn't be possible if that bishop had traded with the bishop on e6. So it's kind of a mixed bag, if you will, and I do think that the open d file is of such importance that Hikaru made the right choice.
Well, I think Hikaru has to deal with g5 still being a threat here. Because as we mentioned, his pawns are a little bit overextended, and a move that challenges the pawn chain base f4 would be pretty annoying. I guess he didn't seem concerned about it yet. He played first knight b6. I still think we're going to see g5 in the future here, but now Dubov is going to have to deal with threats, because if Hikaru plays something like rook d5, keeping his rook on the open file and putting pressure on c5, how is Dubov exactly planning to keep that pawn protected?
He's probably going to give up the c5 pawn and play bishop b7 and try to take on g2.
Right, and Hikaru's not interested in getting the c5 and a5 pawn for the g2 and h3 pawn, just because that would give Dubov an outside pass pawn that is very hard to stop.
Yeah, and especially not only the g2 pawn, the h pawn, the f4 pawn. You really want to keep that pawn because it protects this pawn e5. It keeps the bishop locked in on g7. And so g5 at any rate will be a move that Dubov is considering, especially if there are fewer white pawns over there. So g5, finally, we see the move.
Yeah, I was expecting this for some time now. So, and the thing is, g3 looks tempting to just protect, but then you leave the h3 pawn hanging. So you would have had to get rid of the c8 bishop first, but you want to keep your knight. So that doesn't make sense. F takes g5 is going to drop e5, and then you're going to get double pawns. So I don't love that either. Are there any trickier moves like e6 potentially? Because g takes f4 doesn't work after e takes f7. And then e6 could cause Dubov to double his pawns. So then even if Hikaru takes on g5 after, well, we both got doubled pawns. So it's a little bit worse for both of us, which makes it less bad for both of us, question mark.
Exclamation point, question mark. Well, the bishop on g7 is a really good piece, and the open f file means that black can counter, and that's why Dubov is okay with these trades. And Hikaru has a tough choice, because we forced the variation down here with starting with e6, but if we just stop and pause after g5. So let's talk about all the threats. Of course, g takes f4 is immediately trying to win a pawn, so that's one. If this pawn is removed from f4, this pawn e5 is going to be captured. And you made a good point that g3 would probably be the move that white would play if nothing were wrong with it, but this pawn on h3 is hanging. So then this bishop will just snag that pawn. And you said, well, you'd have to get rid of the bishop, but does white want to take on c8 and enter a bishop of opposite color with rook endgame? That's a tough question. I think white is still better there, but there is danger because, especially with this pressure on f4 and then on e5, that we're not actually getting anything significant for Hikaru. And I'm going to just go broader picture back for a second. The essential question that Hikaru needs to figure out, and he needs to be honest with himself, and that's the struggle we all have as chess players, is white even that much better here anymore? And if the answer is no, maybe you do need to make a move like knight takes c8 and just say, I will play with a slight advantage, but I shouldn't just be playing for a win because I feel like I should be better. No, I have to calculate, I have to assess, and then determine, am I actually better here? And as I said, if the answer is no, then it's only a slight advantage. Then stop playing for a win. Just play to create problems for your opponent.
That's a very important point, trying to understand what your overarching goal is here, because if you are trying to play for a win in a position where you have no business doing that, then often you will over push and actually end up in a worse position. And that's the worst thing to end up with the white pieces, or losing a game on match 2 would be very difficult for either side. It's still relatively early here. So I guess I can understand why Hikaru is starting to think here. He does have, double his opponent's time here, so he does feel comfortable going through the details.
That's right. So is bishop a4 possible? I see is asked. It definitely is possible, where you put pressure on the rook on e8, and that forces the rook over to f8. But then, while the bishop is sitting totally fine on a4, it also gives this light square bishop for black access back towards the e6 square. And if we do get a trade eventually, you say, well, where is my bishop better? Was it better on b3 or is it better on a4? And the answer may be it's unimportant either way, because the tension on f4 and on e5 is really the essential thing here. But it is a good question because you can get the same position starting with your bishop on b3 or with it on a4.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious here. Do you think that Hikaru still has an edge in the position?
I think that Hikaru's position is slightly better, but it's also more vulnerable. And that sounds like, what are you talking about? And just the reason why I say is that there's already tension and a tough decision for him to make here, where this f4, g5, this e5 pawn, things like that. I mean, really, how do you weigh that? And I think that you look at the evaluation bar, we have that on screen, and it now go down to 0. So it's going up a little bit to slightly better for white, down to 0. And that's actually where my mind has been going. I'm like, white has to be better here. Look at that knight on b6. It's advanced. Look at the bishop on b3. The bishop on c8 is not doing anything. But we just can't take these individual elements and just make that the sum of the position. No, we have to put them all together here. And the problem is this bishop on g7 has no counterpart. And if it can get open, if it can use the diagonal, then black's position starts improving.
That's a very fair point here. And, Hikaru is a minute away from being similar on the clock. So I think we're going to see a decision from Hikaru in the sense of, does he feel like he's better or he's worse based on his next move?
Right, and he's spending a lot. Look how much time he has now. He's went from 9 minutes to he spent 5 minutes on this move. So clearly, he understands this is a very important decision.
But it also makes me think that maybe he played a little bit too quickly earlier. Playing for a time advantage, and maybe he didn't anticipate how difficult this position would be. Or do you think he kind of understood and was saving his time for later?
He was doing a great job of conserving the time. And it is a difficult position, and the combination of those two things is, on one hand, compliment to Hikaru's time management skills, but on the other hand, it may, because you have a time advantage, because you've been better, it may lead you to make some decisions that you could potentially regret. And we see rook d5 played. We talked about bishop b7 as an option before. We still can take on f4 here, and we saw a trade. G takes f4, rook takes c5, and look at the evaluation bar, Alexandra.
Hang on, I'm looking at it on your side. Oh my gosh, negative 0.5, 0.3. Okay, so I mean, obviously that's nothing that's going to be decisive, but to hop so much in one move is basically backing up your point of white is better but more vulnerable. One misstep and the position starts to convert. And you keep talking about the long bishop diagonal. So maybe a move like f6 f6 in the future is going to allow e6, but when the bishop is able to open, that's when we're going to start to see black having more comfortable piece play.
And now we see that white is up a pawn, 5 pawns for white, 4 for black, and yet the engine still is liking black's position. It's the power of the bishops. It's also the power of the outside passed pawn. And this pawn on h7, it hasn't done anything all game, but watch out for an h5, h4, and that pawn rolling, but not yet, because there's a rook on a5. So anytime you put a pawn on the same rank, not just a pawn, any piece on the same line as a rook, watch out for a move. So h5, e6 would have been played, freeing up this rook to attack h5 while putting pressure on f7. It would have allowed white an easy way out of this. So rook d8 chosen by Dubov, a4 by Hikaru, and now en passant.
Okay, so Hikaru now also has an outside pass pawn. How do you evaluate which one of these pass pawns is more of a threat?
The bishop pair work very well with pass pawns. A knight does not do well stopping a pass pawn. This knight on b6, just think about how far it has to go. It has to go to d5, it has to go to f4, whereas the bishop in one move can play bishop c8 or something like that and stop the pawn. Of course, bishop c8 would be a bad move, but the point is that a bishop has that long range capabilities, where maybe bishop to f1, where I just stop you here. And look at this move, e6, a great choice by Dubov, shutting off the 5th rank. So now h5 can be played without the threat of e6. I mean, this is, I hate to sound like, oh, I'm calling everything going on, but I really was worried about Hikaru's position there because it felt fragile. And he played on. He felt like he had something going for him in the position, but now I'm really worried.
Okay, so let's say that Hikaru realizes that now he has to go on the defensive. That's definitely going to influence his plan here, because maybe instead of prioritizing going for the pawn push, can he try to just get his rook over to the king side as fast as possible so that he doesn't have to deal with that extra pass pawn? At the end of the day, he is still up a pawn, so he does have compensation for the bishops and the h pawn.
So in king a2, but how is he going to get his rook back? That's another question.
So he'd have to defend the pawn on e5 first, because his rook cannot go to a4 otherwise. So how is he going to defend that pawn? I guess the problem is if he makes a move like f4, then his rook's journey is even slower. Rook a4, bishop e4. Maybe he just gives e5 back. He has an extra pawn. What if he just plays rook a4 now with the threat of rook h4?
And rook a4, rook h4 feels like you need to do something like that. But if I take on e5 for black, then a rook d1, there's checkmating threats as well. I mean, I think you're right that rook a4 kind of has to be played. So rook a4, bishop takes e5, rook h4. But the issue still is that rook d1 threatens the checkmate on a1. And actually, your knight is also a problem, because if I check you on a1 and you have to go to the b file, then your knight is hanging at the end of things here. I mean, this is looking really tough, just with the bishop pair attacking the white king. So all this stuff.
That's true. But if you don't allow black to go for that kingside attack, then you have to allow black to go for that pawn push. So it just seems like a lack of good options here, which is why Hikaru does indeed continue with rook a4. And now we're probably going to see bishop takes e5.
Yeah, bishop takes e5 played with rook d1 next, bishop f5 coming. Oh, like, this is just, it's so easy to play for Dubov. And we talked about how he was the one in some time trouble earlier. Now I think he's going to be the one with just easier play throughout. And rook e4, you see the evaluation bar drop even more to minus 3.8, which means that this is a winning position for
Right.
Dubov if he plays it right.
And the reason that's probably the case is because, as you mentioned, the bishop pair, they're so great at helping pass pawns promote. And the reason for that is because they can control all of the squares very quickly, and they can also be defended by the pawn. So, a move like bishop g2, if it was on the board, h4, h3, and h1 are all protected by the bishops here.
And a nice way to start, you saw it, and I heard you say, like, oh, if h4 was there, because bishop g2 right away, I think it's important for everyone to see this. Rook g1
Right.
happens, and that's a pinned bishop, which isn't the end of the world, because black can play rook to d2 and protect it, but still, you don't want to get into these kind of pins. So h4 played, check on
Right.
g1, king f8, knight c4, and
And I mean, the bishop doesn't even have to go to g2. The light squared bishop just needs to move out of the way so that the pawn can move. Even something like bishop f5, making space to support the pawn with h3 looks very strong here, in addition to the fact that he would be putting pressure on the c2 pawn if he ever brings his rook to d2. Not now, because the knight is attacking, but in the future.
it's a good point. And it's also amazing, Alexandra, we talked about how nice white's light squared bishop looked earlier and how bad black's light squared bishop was I think that it's clear that the reverse has happened somehow. The bishop on h3 is a very good piece. The bishop on b3 can't actually help fend off this passed pawn. So Daniil can also think about playing king e7 rook, and trying to get the rook to h8 at some moment behind your passed pawn. But I don't think it was necessary to do that just yet. Bishop f5 played. I mean, this pawn is going to h3, and then I can decide to bring my king and get my rook behind.
Well, this is exactly what was the risk of the position. We liked Hikaru's dynamic chances, but we knew that if Dubov somehow gets out of it and into an endgame, you know, his bishops are going to get open, and that's where he's going to have the advantage here. So Hikaru certainly on the offense here. In terms of Dubov's plan, he's going to continue to try supporting that pawn. But can he win with just trying to support that pawn, or does he have to create an additional weakness for Hikaru?
I think, you know, how would you create that additional weakness? I guess that's sort of what I'm trying to wrap my head around. Because I would like to create one. I just am not sure the best way to do so.
Well, let's say you try to put pressure on the f3 pawn to win an extra pawn, and then all of a sudden you have 3 passed pawns instead of 1.
That's a good point. So rook d4 kind of does that. It also threatened bishop takes c2, because if I took on c2, your bishop would take, and you lose this knight on c4. So knight e3, bishop g6 played. But this is actually the start of a good approach for Hikaru. His position is still tough, but bring the knight back towards the king side, then pushing your a pawn to either use as a pass pawn, try to promote it, or as a decoy that will now force black's attention over to the queen side, so you can't just push your pawn down.
Okay, and Dubov under a minute on the clock, Hikaru around 3 minutes, but I don't think that time advantage is going to be enough to trick Dubov here. So Hikaru's f3 pawn is under attack. Rook h3 is one option to defend it, because rook f1, you don't really want to move your rook off of the h file. Okay, he goes for a5 instead.
And is he trying to get some kind of bishop takes f3, rook f1 tactic, like with the 2 bishops under attack?
That makes sense, although I thought you could play rook f4 after. But maybe it's just awkward instead of getting material.
No, you're absolutely right. Rook f4 protects it, and the bishop still protects the a8 square. This other bishop can come to d4 next to stop it from going to a7. This is why the bishops are so powerful. It's from the center of the board. They prevent ideas in the complete other flank, you know, from both flanks, honestly. So the bishop on f3 covers a8 while trying to help your pawn promote. Just the power of the bishops. And it's clear. Bishop takes f3 played by Dubov with 33 seconds left, though. So now it's back into the 40s because of the increment. a6 played after rook f4. So
okay. Bishop d4, so he is pushing the knight away. And why was that important to do here? Because he's also holding the a7 square.
Yeah, I love it when you get that rhetorical question and you're
sorry.
Just like, hey, I got this. No,
Sometimes I ask a rhetorical question, but then I realize it's too straightforward, and I just answer it anyway.
But I think that's important because we should always be asking ourselves these questions, even if they seem simple or basic or whatever. It's like we should always think, why did our opponent make this move, or why am I thinking about this plan? Am I missing something in the process? So I really think it's a good way of thinking to train your brain to always question. You can't do it out loud, and you just can't.
And that's how you're usually taught to play chess, to ask yourself certain questions, and then eventually you start doing automatically. But until then, it's a really good structure to just get used to if you're trying to improve quickly and not miss things.
That's right. And the bishop on d4 hits the knight on e3. What was the knight on e3 doing? It was protecting the rook on f1. May not be of the utmost importance, but this rook on f4 also gains a new square, f6, if I need to retreat it. And knight g2 feels like the move that you have to think about because the bishop seems pinned on f3. And if that bishop can't move, then aren't I going to go steal your h4 pawn? The problem is, well, there are multiple problems. One is that rook f5 looks good because I'm swinging over to a5 with not just a check, but with a checkmate. Because knight takes h4, rook a5 check, and you see that evaluation bar, boof, there it goes. Your king is stuck, and my rook is coming down to a1 to checkmate you.
That's pretty intimidating. So where's the knight going to go to? I guess c4 so that it holds the a5 square. But then the pawn is going to keep marching forward. So this is kind of what I was talking about in terms of two weaknesses. So we've talked about this principle, but I know there's a lot of new people tuning in. And in endgames, it's called the principle of two weaknesses, where often one weakness isn't enough for you to win. But as soon as you create two, you have so many pieces, they're so sparse, they can't defend against both. Oh gosh, and we have a resignation.
Oh, so rook e4 pins this knight and this rook behind it. I mean, the knight can't move because knight g2 would protect the rook, but I can just take your knight on g2 as my bishop protects this rook on e4. So we see a resignation. That means that Daniil Dubov takes a 1.5 to half lead right now. It's certainly not over. I mean, Hikaru Nakamura, if anybody, can win a game on demand, but Alexandra, this was what looked like a very promising position early for Hikaru, and then Daniil Dubov turned the tables.
Well, that's the thing. It's a mini match, and if you get into a more complicated position where either sides have chances, it can go either way. Of course, Hikaru could have gone for a more drawn position if he wanted to, but he decided to play for a win, and that was one of the risks. He also did it with the white pieces, so Hikaru is going to get one more white in the last game. We have two more games, so it is not over, but he's certainly going to have a psychological disadvantage. And I think at this point, it's fair to say that he is no longer the favorite.
No, certainly not. If you're down on the scoreboard with just 2 games remaining against somebody as strong as these two players, you clearly become the underdog at this point. And if we go back in time to around when the queens got traded on move 23, and Black retreated the bishop to c8, and it looks like a position. I mean, how could this be anything but so good for the white side here? Your knight on a4, it came into b6 here. The bishop on b3, clearly better than the counterpart on c8. The bishop on g7, stuck behind these pawns on f4 and e5. And so I was saying this at that moment, like all of these like individual aspects, they favor white, but then you have to take a look at the overarching picture here. And it was the one where g5 was such a good move, and it's a thematic move from Dubov, which breaks free this bishop. And once the bishop broke free, the bishop pair proved dominant.
So what if instead, well, could Hikaru have stopped g5 from happening? So instead of playing, or maybe even after knight, like, if he would have gotten an h4 at some point, I guess h6 g5 would have still happened. So there was no way to stop it completely. But at least in that variation, you wouldn't have had to deal with an outside passed pawn.
That's true. So you take away the g5 square. I blundered a rook, by the way, so that was my turn to do that. And shout out to everybody who's watching here, because we have so many people tuning in, being on the top of English Twitch, and number 2 in Twitch overall. So that's pretty cool.
Wow. You guys, thank you so much for being here. The match is not over yet. 2 more games left.
That's right. And to go back to your point about h4, I think h4 was a good move because it stops g5 directly. If Black wants to play g5, you have to play h6 first and then play for g5. And as you point out, as we saw in the game, that h-pawn was really devastating for White to deal with. If I play h6 and then I play g3, which is possible now because I don't have a pawn hanging on h3 anymore, after g5, just to put it up like as clearly as possible, there's no h-pawn remaining for Black. So in certain endgames, I don't have to deal with the pawn all the way on the flank, but at least it's these pawns will be closer to the center, which means the white king can help out, as can a knight, for instance.
Right, so this seemed like it may have been a better try. I think Hikaru just potentially underestimated the counterplay that Dubov could have gotten with that move. Otherwise, for sure, he would have stopped it.
At g5, just breaking things open. You were the first to point out the pawn on h3 wasn't protected, but only by the pawn on g2, so it couldn't push up. And if you took on c8, maybe that was something he really didn't want to do because opposite colored bishops. And you see the eval bar says it's about even with that trade. So I really wondered if you threw Hikaru into the position fresh versus having the history of the game behind him, if he would have made a different choice, because I feel very strongly in general that the psychological aspects in chess are not always easy to like suss out and figure out, but there are moments where I'm like, wait a second, because of how this game has gone, it looks really good for Hikaru. But if you had thrown him in, just, hey, evaluate this. You're a super GM, you're one of the strongest players in the world, go for it, he would have a different opinion than he did during the game.
Right, and what you're saying in that is he felt like he was winning, and he was used to playing for a win, and he didn't make that switch quickly enough to realize, oh, okay, maybe my advantage of the position has slipped, it's actually more tricky. Let's just play a solid game and not risk it.
That's right. And we still have a couple minutes away from Game 3. Hikaru Nakamura now down 1.5 to Daniil Dubov. And so, Alexander, what does Hikaru have to do to bounce back? He gets black in the next game, in the third game of 4. Excuse me. What does he need to do?
Well, I think he has two strategies here. I mean, he should probably play solid with the black pieces. If he ever thinks that he has winning chances, he should go for it. But he can also save the aggressive play and pushing for a win for the last game when he has white, just because it's going to give him slightly better chances there. Either way, I mean, Dubov plays some really creative openings, and he's able to find his way out of even complicated positions that seem difficult and cramped like he did this game. So it's not going to be an easy task ahead.
It will not be at all. And, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, exactly where. I liked your H4 move. I really do. I think that move was kind of aware of this G5 threat, just we're playing here, trying to take away that threat, and it was one that also sort of protected the pawn in advance so you could play G3. I think H4 was this prudent move, slowing down rather than playing knight to B6. But it is hard to slow down. I don't want to sound overly critical because I'm not being. So I just think that it's really important, it's essential to evaluate your mistakes, to figure out why you made those mistakes. And that way, the next time you get a position like this and the evaluation bar says it's better for white, you can try to figure out why it's better for white and how you should proceed.
Of course. And obviously, I mean, we're commentators. We are not the ones who are sitting on the board who have been grinding over the game for the last 30 minutes or so. And it is much more difficult to make the switch while you're live. Nevertheless, hopefully Hikaru can keep his psychology under control for the next game. And yesterday, Dubov proved that after one win, he knows how to continue playing solidly to just get the win in the mini match.
That's right. And he can do it. We all know it. Hikaru knows it. Dubov knows it. But there's still 2 games left for a lot to prove remains. And I just want to point out that as this is the final match, again, there is the Chess.com PogChamps tournament coming up with some of the most popular streamers on the planet, including Forsen, who's watching us today, and many others. But there also is an event that anybody can get involved with where, if you are a premium member at chess.com, there's the premium arena that is starting in an hour, 51 minutes. So if you are a member there, you can go play. But in the meantime, while we wait for, I kind of want to play in that, but we'll probably be commentating.
I wanted to play as well, but I would rather this match go long and exciting into Armageddon, and we'll just play next time.
Yeah.
Because they're definitely doing this as a recurring event, so even if you guys miss it today because you're watching the commentary, as you should be, you can play it in the future.
Yeah, I would love to play, honestly. Like, people always ask me, like, oh, you're on this commentary, when are you going to play? And it's like, well, that seemed like a perfect chance. But, of course, everybody else can get involved and be happy that they don't have to play me, or be sad that they don't get to play me because maybe I'm not in the best playing shape right now.
Well, I don't know. Yesterday, how did your title Tuesday
Not well.
go?
Don't ask these questions.
I'm sorry, Robert.
You want to hear something? I pulled a full Botez gambit.
Oh, I heard about that. I honestly just was trying to bait you into sharing.
You heard about my Botez gambit and you made me talk about it?
Yes, Robert. So
Oh
Robert,
my gosh.
Very strong player. He's about like 2,900 on chess.com, but he did give his queen yesterday, so it's a little bit tough. But, it happens to everyone, and it definitely made me feel a little better about my chess. So thank you, Robert, for your kindness there.
I'm so glad that you could bring that up. And thank you, Andrea M2112, for the gifted subs there. But it hurt for me, and part of the problem was, and it was totally on my end, I was in full-on commentator mode. And you know how some people drag pieces and some people click? Are you a clicker or a dragger when it comes to moving
I'm a dragger, so I have mouse slips all the time.
Yes, because when you can just drag the piece, or you can click on one square, click on the other, and that's what happens. So I was just trying to show some lines, and I was like, oh, look at this bishop hitting this pawn f7, but instead of drawing an arrow or something like that, I clicked on the square, clicked on the other square, and I was like, oh no, and it was my queen that I lost in the process. So it was a sad day for me. I think I'm moving on by letting everybody, all tens of thousands of you watching, know what happened. Should I bring up the game?
Yeah, honestly, you should bring up the game. Let's see it while we wait.
Oh gosh, this was so sad. All right, I have it here. So I was trying to explain that there's things happening on this square on e4, and instead of just drawing arrows, I accidentally clicked my queen and clicked the square and made this move.
It happens so often though when you're drawing arrows. That's how I've made mistakes as well, because you're obviously trying to explain to your chat what's going on, and then instead of doing the arrow, you put your piece there. I rage quit. It makes me very upset, but you are so cool, calm, and collected, Robert. I wish we had a clip.
No, no. I hope there are no clips. I'm clicking out of this game because we're about to see the next game in this match, which is where all our focus should be.
And Robert, I'm just gonna go downstairs, grab a Red Bull, and I'll be right back.
Okay, you are so consistent. You are so consistent.
I have caffeine needs. I have caffeine needs.
Yes, but you're so good at putting me in a tough spot and then leaving. Just go already. Just go.
I'm so sorry.
Just go. All right, you see that this happens? I've been nothing but supportive here. She bounces. She throws my Botez Gambit in my face. And... gosh. Man, this is tough for me. So, yeah, I see you crying for me, chat. When's the next game going to start? Because that makes my life easier. I can just talk about the chess. I don't have to reflect on all my blunders in life and over the chessboard. Can I show... No, I don't want to show my other blunders. Stop asking me to show my mistakes from yesterday, even though it was very instructive. Okay, now there's a poll. Did you hear about Robert's full Botez Gambit? Oh, gosh. Come on. This is... Hikaru bluffed his way to victory by making a very offensive surprise move. I see your question, Sir William Cash. Thank you, Unsafe Unicycle. Appreciate the sub. Let me see. So, the issue is, in general, at this level, like, bluffing against a player like Daniil Dubov will not work out. Because he's not just going to react like, oh, my opponent blundered, he's going to try to figure things out. And so there really also wasn't an opportunity for anything specific that he could have done. So I understand exactly the premise, and it does happen sometimes, so I don't want to dismiss that as being a possibility. But just in the game that we saw, there was never really a moment where Hikaru could have made a speculative pawn sacrifice and gone for something. I see you're back, and we have a new game. So, oops.
Yay, just in time. Thanks so much, Robert, for keeping the ship afloat.
Oh, it was really just me being sad on air, and, well, now we have the next game.
So, Dubov goes for another English, and Hikaru plays it a little bit differently with an early f5. So this is certainly a more aggressive line for Black, and he's also mixing it up. So it seems like he wouldn't be happy going into the same line they usually play.
And so just to go back, c4, e5, knight c3, knight 6, knight f3 instead of knight f6, which we've seen from Hikaru. And we saw knight f6, g3, d5, just to show the start of that last game where the bishop went to g2 and that bishop gets strong. Instead of knight f6, f5 was played, d4 and e4. And so Hikaru is clearly playing to give himself a chance at victory. He is not playing necessarily to win this game. He's not trying to force a win at thin air, because if he loses, the match is over. But when you play a move like f5, and Alexandra, I'm going to throw it over to you. I mean, how risky is that choice?
Well, one thing that I've been telling my students in PogChamps is please do not push your f-pawn before move 15 or so. So it's just kind of as a rule or thumb for people who are learning the game or relatively new, because it just puts you at risk of a lot of kingside attacks that can just be so tricky early on. Of course, I mean, Hikaru isn't going to get checkmated in the center of the board or anything like that, but it does still create a weakness on his light square. So if you look at the long diagonal, not long diagonal, second longest diagonal from a2 to g8, well, if he puts a queen or a bishop there in conjunction with his knight on g5, the king might actually end up getting in some trouble. And
that's a really good point, and it goes to show that's why pushing the pawn to f5 can be a problem. But here, Dubov chooses d5, advancing in the center, and these type of positions, honestly, are very complex, because on one hand, you have a potentially exposed king, but if Black is able to play knight f6, castle kingside, your king feels quite safe, and you feel like you're the one who's going to attack your opponent, thanks to especially this pawn e4, which is restricting White's pieces.
Right. I mean, it's a very double-edged game. So before I was talking about how Hikaru might go for something more solid with Black and try to push with White. Instead, he's going for something double-edged, because he probably wants to get double-edged chances in both this game and the next, since the most likely outcome is a draw. Wherever he can get chances, he'll probably try to push for it there.
That's right. And now with his knight on e5, with his pawns on f5 and e4, Black's center is looking quite good. One really annoying thing for Hikaru to figure out is you tend to want to kick this knight from g5, but you also don't typically want to play h6, because you've already pushed your f pawn. If your h pawn leaves, then there are more weak light squares on the king side. So Dubov first attacks this bishop, forces Hikaru to make a decision. Do I capture on c3? Probably not. You should drop your bishop back. But still, this knight on g5, it's an annoying piece, and kicking it also creates problems on some of these light squares.
Right, so he's probably not going to push h6 right away, and h6 is usually a move that is played when you have a bishop on g5 because that pin tends to be a lot more annoying. The knight on g5 is annoying because if you push the d-pawn, it can hop to e6, but it doesn't have any direct threat, so he's actually in no rush to push it away.
That's true. And it also keeps the bishop on c1 tied to that knight, so you can't play e3. Not that you'd really want to play e3 anyway, but now black can threaten e3, which cuts off the bishop on c1 from the knight on g5. So you should always look out for these things. Wait, what's attacking my knight? A queen? Okay, I have a bishop protecting it. I'm safe. But let's play a move like a4, some really random move. Here comes a move like e3, where I'm cutting your bishop off from the defense of this knight, and that becomes a problem in so many variations where I'm opening up your king.
Right, and if he plays a move like bishop f4, so that he could push e3 in the future while still protecting his knight and attacking e5, it's making the dark squared knight, sorry, both knights are on the dark squares and they can be on any color. It's making the g5 knight's plan a little bit more awkward because if h6 ever comes, the knight has to go back on h3 and it can't reposition to f4.
And that's the square you would like to go to, and the bishop and the knight can't share the square, exactly. So bishop c5 was played, and we will see what Dubov will do in response here. Because it's really not an easy position. You don't want to spend too much time either. That's kind of the tricky thing here, is you don't want to be down 5 minutes in a position like this with really immense complications, but you also want to find the right strategy. So Alexandra, how do you try to balance that this early in the game?
Well, that's a great question. So Dubov is already struggling in the clock situation. So how I would look at this is it's a close position. Black's king is a little bit weaker because of the f-pawn. White has more space in the center, but at the same time, also white has some dark square weaknesses in the center. So ideally, what I would like to try to do here is probably get rid of some of Hikaru's minor pieces, so the knight on e5 and the bishop on c5 if possible. If not, I try to castle as quickly as possible and start going for some type of attack towards Hikaru's king.
Yeah, and that would, in order to attack Hikaru's king, you probably have to castle queenside, and Dubov plays knight h3, just saying, I don't want to deal with e3, can bring my knight to f4. You made a good point about that if black plays d6, now once this knight comes to f4, there's this e6 square, because the pawn's on f5, not on f7. And that's, even if it costs white a pawn, that is a very common idea that's played, because you get the bishop off the board, and then the remaining light squares become easier to take advantage of.
It honestly still feels weird to me, though, because it feels like Hikaru won, because Dubov retreated his knight without Hikaru making a pawn weakness of h6. And knight f6 was a move that Hikaru was putting off because it stops the queen from attacking the knight on g5. But now he's able to play it because, well, there's no more knight on g5, so he doesn't have to worry about keeping that threat so that white can't play e3.
And he accomplished everything that he wanted, where he kicks the knight out without making a concession, and he compromised on the king side. He's pawns on h7 rather than h6, especially with this knight coming to f4. You'd rather your pawn be on h7, just so this g6 square feels a little bit safer. And very annoyingly, is this knight on e5 is here, and it's here to stay, because there's no easy way to kick it, and black can always protect it with an eventual queen e7. So bishop e7 right. Chosen by Hikaru. I would probably...
But I do like this plan. This is what I was thinking for Dubov as well. I mean, Hikaru's pieces are very active and very annoying, so I do understand why he's prioritizing just kicking them backwards.
And speaking of kicking them backwards, I was about to ask, is bishop f4 the move that you'd want to see here? They try to kick this knight. Oh, and there it is, bishop f4, trying to kick the knight. But look at the evaluation bar. It's really climbing up there in black's favor. And I think part of the reason why is, are you really going to take my knight on e5 if I play d6? Where I just
I do love double pawns, Robert, and I don't mind giving up my bishops in a close position, so maybe.
It's just a very committal decision, especially because you said, like, aren't some of these dark squares for white ones that you can't compete with too easily, right? If this bishop gets back to c5, and I can play f4 for black, open up my light squared bishop. It does feel like there's an attack brewing for Hikaru if Dubov is to trade on e5. And well,
That's fair. He did decide to play knight g6 instead, which also makes quite a bit of sense because he would like to trade off the bishop pair if possible. Not for
whoa.
Okay.
Oh.
d6. That's a very bold move, a very committal move. And I imagine he's planning to castle queenside at some point so that he can put pressure on d6. Or even just play rook d1 right away, but he's not going to immediately get back the pawn on d6 because Hikaru can get rid of the bishop on f4 that's attacking it.
And that was really a strategic pawn sacrifice, positional pawn sacrifice. Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn for an attack. Here, what Dubov is trying to do is if you take me on f4, I take back with my knight, and I have the d5 square for a white knight, I can castle queenside or put a rook on d1 and put pressure on the d6 pawn. So he's trying to shut down black's pieces, and for the cost of the pawn, he sees that it's worth it. And, well, you have to be careful for Hikaru. Not that there's any risk of losing in the next few moves, nothing like that. This isn't a tactical affair, but even positions that don't seem tactical in nature can be dangerous because if white is able to prevent black's, especially minor pieces, from doing much of anything, and white has more space, then all of a sudden you're struggling to come up with a concrete plan, and white can just castle, bring the rooks to the d file, double up there, and it's not clear how black in return gets anything in terms of active counterplay.
What side would you prefer to play here as?
Probably black, and I would play the move d5. I would sacrifice the pawn back.
Okay, so you wouldn't even bother trying to hold on to it. You'd say I much more appreciate having space for my bishop here. And if you push d5, does Dubov even have to take right away, or can he play a move like e3? And I say that because black's king is weak, and that's the main theme in this position with having played f5. So if you make a move like d5, e3, bishop takes c4, bishop takes c4, well, I think my piece activity is much more important, and your king can't castle.
Yes, because that pawn's on f5 rather than on f7, so that would be a problem for black for sure. And not only can you not castle, I can play bishop f7 check if I want to keep your king away from the castling and force on f8. And if your king can't castle, it often is feeling quite unsafe. So I think that you're right, that after d5, which was played, and after e3, I think you'll see both sides avoid capturing the pawn. And if you take on d5 with the pawn here, let's say, then what Hikaru is claiming is my bishop on e7 is a better piece, and so I can take on f4 and put my bishop on d6, maybe even put this bishop on e5, and you can already see how much better black's bishop is, and there's no pawn on d6 preventing its availability, its flexibility.
Right, so Dubov did play e3 for this reason, and now with Hikaru, I mean, if my king is the biggest problem, I'm not going to be able to get away with castling after the pawns are traded. So if I'm ever going to castle, I feel like it has to be now, and then eventually put my king to h8 so there's no discovery checks.
Yeah, castling does seem like a very sensible and safe move. And also, this white king is in the center. It takes more time to castle. So you have to play a bishop move and then castle. But if you take on c4, the bishop comes out immediately. So not only is it preventing black from castling, it's making white's king castle next move. It's allowing that development in one turn. So typically, if you can help it, you don't want to take on c4 when the bishop has not moved yet. You want your opponent to sort of waste a move developing the bishop and then take. And you see this most often in queen's pawn openings, not in this specific type of position.
Right. So d takes c4 doesn't look like a good option. Castling maybe one he considered. What else do you think Hikaru should take into consideration here?
So those are the two main moves, I would say, is capturing c4, castling. Maybe, taking on f4 doesn't feel right. Because if you take on f4, in comes my knight to f4, and now I'm just putting more pressure on d5, hoping you take me on c4, and then now all my pieces are aiming at the black king side. So that seems like a problem. So can't take on f4, and so he castles.
So Hikaru did castle, probably just because lack of better moves and trying to get into king safety here. Still a very tricky position. Hikaru is holding his pawn for now. Does Dubov want to take on d5 right away? Or is there anything else that's more important for him here than trying to just get that pawn back?
He plays rook d1. He doesn't want the material. He wants his pieces to be just fluid. And if you take on c4, still bishop takes c4 in one move. Remember, I was saying you want to, from the black side of things, you want to take on that c4 square after the bishop is developed. So you like say, just to give an example that won't happen. Let's say black plays king h8, and he played d6. But let's say you play king h8 and then bishop e2. Now I would take, because you just spent a move playing bishop e2, so you kind of wasted a turn while I made a useful move in the time being. So
right. So you wait to make your opponent lose a tempo. So d6 instead, Hikaru is freeing up his bishop on c8. He would like to get that bishop on e6 at some point here. And if Dubov takes too long in recapturing the pawn, maybe a move like bishop e6, bishop f7, he'll continue putting pressure on d5, and then he'll have a pawn that he wants to continue attacking for the rest of the game. Dubov now makes that waiting move, bishop e2, but d takes c4, bishop takes still comes with check. So it's not wasting the tempo yet.
Yeah, and the tempo that Hikaru uses to play d7 and d6, which is a useful move for sure, but now you don't have this bishop e6 idea that you were mentioning. You would like to develop, connect your rooks, and there's still pressure down the d file. White's going to castle. The white king will be much safer. So Hikaru says, hey, we'll still continue this waiting game. Here's h6. Now you don't have the g5 square for your knight, so my bishop can come to e6 and to f7 and safely reroute itself.
I like that move. And I wonder, what is Dubov going to do with his bishop? I mean, it's very awkward right now. And his knight on h3 is also awkward. It doesn't have anywhere to go. I mean, you want your knight on f4, not your bishop.
You do.
Maybe bishop g3, knight f4 looks good here then.
Bishop g3, that's interesting. Trading off this knight on g6 for the knight on h3, that hasn't really been doing much. And that's why Hikaru was refraining from taking on f4. Because you may say, I want the bishop pair, but it's a relatively closed position. And so taking on f4 will allow this knight to improve itself on the f4 square. And the bishop, especially the dark square bishop for black, doesn't have a diagonal to operate from. So I think that it's really showing some high-level skill right now, how neither player is flinching with respect to c4 and d5.
Yeah, they are so good at keeping the tension, which is a skill in chess that is pretty tough to master because it's so uncomfortable and you have to continue calculating it every turn. I think it was Grishuk who said chess is a constant battle between not wanting to calculate and wanting to win. And keeping the tension, you're just forced to keep calculating every single move. Does it work now? What changed?
And I mean, it's a great quote and it's a great point, because right now is c takes d5 the time to do it as it attacks this bishop on e6? It seems like it's the time because, well, isn't black going to take on c4? But if I take on c4, even though I'm trading the bishops on c4, the light squares for black will still be vulnerable. The same exact principles apply. This rook on d1 is nicely placed, hitting this pawn on d6. So, you can wait only so long. That's true. But this position may not be a moment where you have to rush it. You can play this bishop g3 move, which I'm starting to like more and more, that you suggested.
Yeah, but bishop g3, mostly because you're just trying to improve the position of your pieces, and at some point you're going to have to do it anyway. Okay, so he decides that now's the time to take on d5. I was going to say, if you're not taking on d5 now, then you might as well go for it.
Yes. And he takes.
Why did he take with the knight?
I was about to make you answer the same question, so you asked
to
first.
it, Robert. Go for it.
You asked first. He wants to keep the d file open if he can, and he would love to take this bishop on e7 and win the d6 pawn. So you know that black is going to react. And part of it is that if you look what happens when you take on d5, there's an open c file that's available. So if, let's say, knight d5, c takes d5, you have to move your bishop, and let's say you go bishop f7. I think that clearing the c file was important to white, and so is the fact that there's no knight on f6 to maybe come to e8 later to protect the d6 pawn. So there are certain weaknesses in black's position, or at least long-term pawns that will be stuck on their squares for the long run. And so by trading some of potential defenders, white feels like it's easier to attack those squares.
Absolutely. And I just want to take a pause here. Do you think this is a position Hikaru hoped for, given that he's in a need-to-win situation?
Definitely, because it's not like both sides have the same exact plans. It's not symmetrical. It's just a position where we're now fighting with tension in the center, potential play on both sides of the board. If this knight ever moves from g6, it takes the bishop on d5, which is a good decision because you don't give white the tempo of when you take on d5 with the pawn, there's no bishop on e6 under attack. But I was going to say that black can move this knight away from g6 at some point and play for g5.
And I like that plan a lot because one of the biggest weaknesses in white position is just the awkwardness of his dark squared bishop and his knight on h3. So Hikaru now goes offering the queen trade, and if queen takes b6, a takes b6, Hikaru gets doubled pawns, yes, but he also opens up the a file, which Dubov will have to defend, and then he gets the opportunity to first put his rook on the open c file.
That's very true. And the pawn on d5, which looks like it's pretty good. If the rooks get traded, it starts to become weaker and weaker, and black will try to attack it. So that's a pawn that needs defense, and that is why Hikaru feels okay trading queens. And for Dubov, it's you can't really avoid it. At least I don't really think you can, because where is this queen going to go? If you go queen a3, which keeps the queen on the board, then doesn't black just continue very naturally with rook f to c8? I choose the f rook because I want to keep the a7 pawn defended as long as possible, and there's only one open file, so my rook doesn't really want to go to e8 or d8 anyway, so I might as well bring my rook to c8 while just keeping my pawn on a7 defended. It also frees up the f8 square for the black knight to maybe go knight f8, knight d7, and then I can play forward on the king side with g7 and g5. So I think that for Dubov here, he plays rook c1, we see the trade on b3. What do you think about this decision, Alexandra?
So I'm guessing this decision is partly tactical because knight takes d5 doesn't work after bishop c4 pins the knight. I guess it's an interesting decision for Dubov to want to trade the queens here, because I think that Hikaru's position is the one that is going to improve in this endgame, just because the d5 pawn feels weaker than the d6 pawn, and Dubov's pieces are more awkwardly placed in terms of trying to get them onto the queen side, which is where he also has some new weaknesses in terms of b2 and b3.
It's the power of the knights in a closed position. This knight on g6 can hop from f8 to d7 to c5, for instance. This bishop on f4, good luck getting that one over to the queen side, because I can never go to e5, as that square's under black's control. And this knight on h3 is stuck. You know, the bishop would need to move first, then the knight would go to f4, but that's only trading. So interestingly, this bishop on f4 is actually kind of a bad piece.
Yeah, it really is. And this is a dream, endgame for Hikaru, given how it started off. Knight takes d5 still doesn't work here because you always have rook takes c8, bishop c4, or even ideas like rook d1. So that pawn on d5 doesn't need to be defended for now, but that's not the problem. Like you said, the knights are much better at hopping around. That being said, the knight on g6 for Hikaru is a little bit slow to get into the action. Knight f8, knight d7 would take some time, and the bishop on f4, I guess what's going to happen after knight f8 and g5 threat?
I guess the bishop will have to drop back to g3 and say, you've advanced your pawns, good for you, not the end of the world. But this knight on h3, that's really the problematic piece, and you've been highlighting it since the very beginning. So another idea that may be played by Hikaru is knight to e5. Even though we talked about the bishop on f4 can't get back to the other side of the board, if you take on e5, and I take with my d-pawn, now my bishop on e7 looks better. It has a diagonal to work with. This knight on h3 looks worse because my e5 pawn stops your knight from going to f4. But of course the issue is if you start trading pieces, get into an endgame with opposite colored bishops, even if a side loses a pawn, sometimes even two, in a pure opposite colored bishops endgame, because a dark square bishop can never control the light squares, it does in the back of your mind be like, wait, am I giving my opponent easier chances to hold an endgame?
Interesting, because you just keep thinking about it in terms of how do you keep the complications, what is it going to make it hardest to hold for my opponent. Dubov here 5 minutes versus Hikaru's 8, so the longer he keeps it complicated for, the more he's going to eat up Dubov's clock, and I think Dubov is the one who has to spend more time here because, like you said, his piece development is less intuitive. I do like rook fc1 for Dubov here, and then maybe trying to move his king over and bring the knight to g1.
Rook fc1 looks like the most natural move and is played. So is Hikaru going to play knight b6? He might just want to trade off the rooks. We mentioned earlier that the pawn on d5 is such a weakness and it will require white to pay a lot of attention to it. So if I play knight b6 and we trade all the rooks on c8, I guess his plan is just, all right, let's go into this, and I'm going to come after your pawn d5. My king can quickly run into the center. My bishop can come to f6 at some moment. Your pawn on b2 is now vulnerable. It's
And
something.
I see the eval bar is giving that position negative 0. Okay, it keeps switching around. I was gonna say slight preference for black, but not convinced that Hikaru can win it. Still, I guess he had to go for it. He didn't really have another option here. So now we're just gonna see if Hikaru can take this slight advantage and convert it. Okay,
That-
G4 I like a lot.
I'm glad you said it because I was about to say that was an excellent move, and it's one
Yes.
that you wouldn't have thought about several moves ago because this knight on c8 was on f6, which made this impossible. But now that you're here, and maybe this is something that players overlook, where they're like, wait a second, at the end of this 7-move variation, oh shoot, I didn't realize g4 happens, and once g4 is played, I'm just getting rid of your nice pawn structure. This f5 e4 configuration limited the scope of white's bishop. Now I'm forcing a pawn off the board, and once f5 goes, e4 becomes weaker too.
Right. So now Hikaru does have the option to take the bishop on f4. And I pointed out because he's not going to have that option for long. Bishop g3 can be moved pretty soon, especially after f takes g4. Bishop takes g4 also attacks the knight on c8. Do you think he should trade off the bishop pair here, or that the knights are still advantageous?
I think that this is a moment somewhat similar to the last game, but a very different style of position, where Hikaru should realize, all right, I don't really have the advantage anymore, and if those bishops get into open space, then I'm going to be the one in trouble. So a move like knight takes f4 and getting into an opposite colored bishop endgame, that would be the way I would go. I would just say, let's just do this. Let's get an opposite colored bishop position where my chances of holding are extremely high. I'll draw the game, be down 2-1, where I have white in the final game, because this is a position where I really see black losing this well before I see black winning this.
Just because of his mentality with need to win will make him play more inaccurately?
Well, and the bishop, once the bishops come alive, especially this light square bishop, watch out for this pawn e4. I'm removing the pawn defending it, so if I can steal your e4 pawn, then I have a central mass that I'm going to start pushing. And especially with knights on the board, with just opposite colored bishops, okay, black will hold no matter what pretty much, because as we keep talking about, a bishop in the light squares can't compete with the bishop in the dark squares and vice versa. But I'm worried about the e4 pawn in the center collapsing.
And you know what I've noticed about Dubov? And I don't know if it's fair to say this, but he seems to get in somewhat suspicious looking openings. It's always a little bit shaky, but he finds the most creative tactical ways out of them. And then he just plays endgames and late middle games so beautifully.
For sure. He is a very strong and precise player. And, I just see it in my chat, people talking about this. The players have cameras on them. They've shared their screens. Everything is under control. And it's really not worth their reputation in addition to the consequences that come from anything unfair play. So I really don't appreciate the speculation. I think everybody should stop that. And it's just not right. It really isn't, because there's nothing that even hints at that being a possibility. So to say it is just disrespectful, and I just want to say that and continue with the game.
Nicely put, Robert. So knight b6 played, and the bishop is still on f4. It's still hanging out there. Dubov still has an awkward pawn structure on the queen side, but it's not really an issue yet. He first has to deal with knight takes d5, although he doesn't actually have to deal with it because bishop e6 is a threat, so it is protected by that tactic. Bishop g3. So Dubov does decide to keep the bishop pair, and he is potentially preparing knight f4. So it does two things. It keeps the bishop pair, and it finally gives a plan and some space for his white knight. For his knight, not the white knight.
It also created a threat, which is why Hikaru went knight h4. Is if that knight stayed on g6, bishop f5 happens, where I attack your knight on g6 and win your pawn e4. And that would be the worst case scenario, where white sells the two bishops and wins that central pawn. So knight h4 played, so you can't play bishop f5. And if this bishop moves away, maybe at some point there's knight f3 check, but we can go into another opposite colored bishop ending if we take on h4.
Okay, so knight f4 played now. And let's see. So the pawn on d5 is finally protected. Knight f3. It doesn't make sense to trade off the bishop pair at all. So I think maybe king g2 to hold the h2 square, or king f1 and bring his king into the action.
Although king f1, there may be this knight d2 check, picking up the b3 pawn, which isn't the end of the world because you may end up giving the b3 pawn and winning the e4 pawn. So these are the kind of trade-offs that are necessary to evaluate in this endgame. You can take on f3. That's always a possibility, but probably don't like the look of a pawn landing on f3, where now your king is stuck on g1. The potential weakness that was on e4 is now strength on f3, and the d5 pawn is weak. Bishop f6 comes, hitting the b2 pawn. It feels like black is the one who has gained everything from this kind of trade.
Right, and king g2 also does put pressure on f3, so he's threatening bishop takes f3, e takes f3, king takes f3. Now the pawn on d5 is also protected by the knight, so Hikaru does move his knight away so that it doesn't happen. He's attacking the pawn on b3, and if Dubov protects it by pushing b4, I mean, his pawns will still continuously be able to get attacked, and at some point they're not going to be able to push anymore, and defending them will require the help of white's minor pieces.
Yeah, I was just showing that there'd be for maybe knight b6 to c4 because you can't play b3. The knight on d2 covers it, and that is a type of scenario where then all of a sudden Hikaru has some chances because if he can win one of the pawns, he can create an outside pass pawn for himself. But even there, the engine says an equal position, which means that the bishop pair is super strong.
Yeah, the bishop pair being super strong. That's a theme I think we're all starting to get very familiar with here. So is there any tactical motive Dubov can go for? So maybe attack another pawn and give up his b3 pawn here? I mean, not right away.
Well, maybe you can. Maybe you can play knight e2, and you still can't take on d5 because bishop e6 checks. So that's always available. So if you take on b3, then I go knight c3, and I'm just trying to win this pawn e4.
Right, because then even if knight d2 happens, you have bishop f5. You're attacking the e4 square twice, and there's no way that black can defend it an additional time.
That's right. And there's also knight b5 ideas, hitting a7, hitting d6. This pawn d6 can quickly become a target. So the knight on f4, it looks pretty good, but it's also blocking the bishop on g3. And I like the look of the knight on c3 because it simultaneously defends d5 while putting pressure on e4. But I don't really want to give up my b3 pawn if I'm being honest. I'm just trying to come up with ideas that help white reroute and, just fend off black's threats in the process.
Right. And time situation, Dubov 2 minutes 24 versus Hikaru's 5 minutes. Do you think that that's going to give Hikaru any advantage just because he has more time, or that maybe this position is just too tricky for both?
The time advantage is very important here because that's when you start making mistakes. And the position, the engine, every move is going to just shift from maybe slightly better for black to equal to slightly better for white. They're playing within this pretty close framework here. So he took on b3. He's giving up the e4.
That surprises you.
It really does. Because I didn't want to give up the central pawn mass, and bishop takes e4 also makes this bishop useful in going all directions. You can go back to c2 and protect against any passed pawn that you might try to get.
It's counterintuitive because you usually don't want to gain a double pawn and give away one of your central pawns, but now knight c4 makes me think that the reason Hikaru did that is because he believes he can capture the remaining b pawn, and if he does that, then he's going to have 2 passed pawns, which would be quite a nice position for him.
Ooh, that's really annoying. I actually honestly forgot that the knight on b6 could move into the game. So knight on c4, frustrating me with an attack on the pawn on b2. And if I go knight to d3, trying to protect the pawn, there may just be bishop f6, putting more pressure on b2, and this a pawn is going to try to run.
Right. And what I don't like about knight d3 is that it's cutting off the bishop from being able to come back into play. Of course, the bishop on e4 is also serving a purpose. It's continuing to hold the e5 pawn, but it feels a little bit awkward for the white pieces.
It is indeed. So let's see. He does play knight d3, and it opens up the bishop to the d6 pawn. So if there's ever a way to kick this knight from c4 and the bishop leaves the protection of d6, I will grab that pawn. And I still like bishop f6, maybe a5 as well, to start with a5, a4, and push this one down. And look at the evaluation. It's going more and more in black's favor, so something has gone wrong for Dubov, and now it's going back. The depth, it's the engine is going deep. It's trying to figure out, what is the truth of this position, and as it goes, one ply, the next ply, and that's a turn, it's looking like it's favoring black the deeper it goes.
Okay, so Hikaru does go for your idea, a5 and a4. And I like that because he's first getting his pawn as advanced as possible. And then once he has that, if he can gang up on the b2 pawn, or maybe even at some point sacrifice for it, if a3 and a2 works, probably unlikely, but always nice to keep in mind. Once that pawn is taken, his pawn is so close to promoting.
And there are times where you sacrifice your knight. So let's make a random move like h3, a4, h4. There are times where you can get away with a knight takes b2 move because knight takes b2, a3. This is actually a common endgame tactic where knights on the side of the board are really bad and the knight can't stop my passed pawn.
True. And that would actually be a situation where Hikaru is winning. Okay, so Dubov must be feeling the pressure now. He plays bishop f3, probably with the idea of bishop d1. That way, if a4 is played, he can maybe try bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and then all of a sudden he doesn't have to worry about the passed pawns. Hikaru instead comes with b5. He's pushing both of those pawns. Can you explain why he needs to do that?
He's playing b5. He wants to keep as many pieces on the board because he probably feels like simplification will help Dubov. And he put b5 just to show when. And then after bishop d1 brought his knight to d2. Didn't want to allow this kind of trade on b3 as you were mentioning earlier because then the knight would have come to c1 to pile up on the pawn that would get to b3.
And if his pawn was on a4 and his pawn back on b7, then this wouldn't have worked because a4 would have been hanging. So he wasn't able to push a4 right away.
That's right. And b3 played knight back to b6. So now trying to go a4. Because if you get a4, you're creating an outside pass pawn. And look at this bishop on g3. Hasn't been able to find its way back in the game. Maybe some kind of f3 and bring your bishop to e1. I am worried about this pass pawn.
And Chad is worried about the clock situation because that is all I see them spamming. Yes, Dubov has under 10 seconds. If he goes to 0, don't get too excited right away. It might be the relay chat. But the point is, White is in serious time pressure in a position that is very hard to defend. He plays knight f4 to protect d5. But now a4 is coming. And Dubov has a lonely light squared bishop trying to defend against a passed pawn and 2 knights.
And I'm actually here eating my words because I was saying that if Black tries to play for win, it could be some trouble for him. But Hikaru has played this excellently, and Dubov found himself in some trouble despite the bishop freeing up in the light squares. Hikaru just did a great job of now trying to force his way with an outside pass pawn. The d5 pawn continues to need a defender as it can't be protected by another pawn. And a4, at some point soon, feels like the move.
Yeah. I do like a4 a lot here. Obviously, Hikaru was thinking, so maybe he has some other options. Another somewhat intuitive move. Okay, I looked at g5 just because knight is protecting pawn. If the knight is attacked, then maybe you can win the pawn, but knight g6 it actually doesn't work because it would trap the knight. So Hikaru could also go for the gobbling up more pawn strategy.
G5 looks pretty good. And he's certainly trying to calculate a4 to the end. He's just trying to say, if I go a4, is there any way for Daniil to stop my pawn without sacrificing a piece? Because if there's no way to stop the pawn without giving up material, then of course you go for that. But there are certain situations where, here's something theoretical. I know it's going to be hard to visualize and understand for our newer viewers. 2 knights and a king versus a bear king is a theoretical draw. You're like, wait a second, I'm up 2 full knights, and that's it. My opponent has no pieces. But that is something that Daniil is thinking about. Like, can Dubov get to a position where he trades off all the pawns, he then gives up a piece in the process, or 2 pieces in fact, and gets 2 knights against a bear king?
Right. And Dubov is doing a great job bringing his knight into the queen side here because now a2 doesn't work. But knight takes d5 is a free pawn. It definitely works. The knight has to go to a2 so that it continues stopping the a pawn. But now, I mean, Hikaru has an extra pawn. Still, that extra pawn doesn't do that much because he has to make progress with a3.
This was a really smart defensive play by Dubov because the bishop on d1, it needs to help out on the defense against this passed pawn. And honestly, what Hikaru, I'm sure he has in the back of his head, like, I can't trade too many pawns. Just because of what I was saying, 2 knights against a king, or king and 2 knights versus a king, that is a theoretical draw, and both players know that. So that's probably just there in the back of his mind. Like, how do I prevent any trades? How do I keep more pieces on? And while doing that, how can I kick this knight from a2? Not so simple.
Right. Bishop a4. he is trying to keep Hikaru's king from coming closer with king e8. And knight e4, so we're seeing some slow moves, but the idea is to play knight c3, get rid of the knight that is blocking his pass pawn from promoting. And I don't see how he's gonna stop this plan. Maybe he'll replace the knight on a2 with his bishop after a move like bishop b3. But even in that situation, Hikaru has two knights, so he can go something like knight c3, bishop b3, knight takes a2, bishop takes a2, and then bring the other knight into c3. And Dubov's gonna have to sacrifice his bishop for a pawn.
That's right. And it's all because of this dark square bishop for Dubov has never been able to get into the game. Right, this bishop would need to be on a square like d4 or even on e1 to be happier. But the bishop on g3 has been out here for a long time. Knight b4 played, not trading, because the knights for black can't share the c3 square. If you could bring this knight to c1, then you're pushing that pawn to a2. But it does take a little bit of time to maneuver this knight around. Knight d2 played. Okay. Bishop.
Yep. Where do you think the bishop will go?
Oh, I don't know, because bishop e6 is made by d5. Oh, but then the bishop gets the e5 score. So you don't actually want to push this d pawn if you're Hikaru.
So you don't want to push the d pawn because it allows the e5 square, which then brings another defending piece against the pass pawn. That makes a lot of sense.
You only play d5 if you're certain that after a move like bishop e5, you have some kind of... Oh, actually, the knight on b4 is under attack. So maybe d5 does work.
Oh, good point. Yeah, so d5 because... But, okay, d5, bishop e5, bishop takes b4, then defends your knight on c3, so you're not actually concerned. And if you push d5 and then Dubov has to move his knight can't go to a2. Maybe he can go to c2 so that it's still defending a1 where the pawn wants to promote. But then you could play something like bishop f6, and the dark squared bishop is never getting into e5.
But then maybe I go to d6. So like it's such a weird position where d5 he played it. So Hikaru must be certain that this is going to be a win for him because it's such a risky move based on allowing white's pieces back into the game. So knight c2 played very quickly by Dubov. And here is a big question. Do you play a2 here? You push this pawn. The pawn is protected where it sits. But bishop e5 is the idea for white to get this bishop back in the game to prevent the pawn from promoting.
Right. So a2, bishop e5 is a threat. Can you play bishop f6? Because then bishop d6 isn't as scary anymore because there's no more pawn on a3. Okay, he plays instead knight c4, holding that e5 square so that the bishop can never go there.
And e4 played quickly by Dubov. a2, what is happening here? You couldn't take on e4 with the pawn because the knight on c4 was hanging. And, oh my gosh, he takes on d5 now. So now, all of a sudden, Dubov has a pass pawn of his own. It can't move very easily. There's a bishop and a knight covering the d6 square. But right now, Dubov is the one, even on material, he's trying to get his bishops back in the game. Hikaru's doing everything he can to prevent it. Knight a3 is possible at some point. Bishop d6. Okay, that's...
So why is he trading off his bishop pair here? It seems a little bit slow, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, but he wants to bring his king up to e7 to just like make some progress this way. But can't the white king also... Exactly, king f3, but there's nowhere to go. e4, e3, e2. My king can't actually cross the e-file. So just king e7 for black. Why not?
Right. And, Hikaru's idea is still to put the knight on a3 at some point, because then if the knight takes, he can promote. Why is he holding off playing knight a3?
He can play, but I guess he's anticipating just knight to a1. So you just retreat that knight into the corner. But the evaluation just swung. It's going. It's trying to figure it out. The engine's trying to work here, but there must be some kind of tactic with knight a3.
What about knight d2, knight b3? Now that the king is on f3 with check, and then we could play a1.
Looks quite decent there. So you're just trying to bring the knight to b3 so that you can promote. And I guess Dubov is hoping that in these endgames, we're looking at that two knights and a king versus a king situation. That's what at the back of his mind, he's hoping. He's not calculating it necessarily, but he's hoping that even if you get this knight to b3 and you try to promote, that maybe your knight gets trapped in the corner, and also I can get this endgame that I'm desperately seeking.
Right, because, Dubov realizes at some point he's going to have to sacrifice a minor piece, most likely his knight, for the passed pawn, so he's trying to do it in the way that gives him the best drawing chances. Like you said, there's some endgames that are still a draw, even if you're up a piece.
Ooh, knight b5, trying to go knight to d4 with check, distracting the knight on c2 from the promotion square.
That's an even cuter way to do it.
And Dubov,
Although, yep.
oh sorry, plays bishop d3, but now knight d4 check. Excuse me.
Right, knight d4 check. The king moves. He takes on c2, and either knight that Dubov takes, Hikaru promotes.
I think Hikaru has found a way to win this one.
I think we're gonna see knight d4 and maybe a resignation.
And I guess Dubov will play on a couple more moves. Just because knight d4, you take, get a queen. There's hopefully knight f5 check, is at least what you're counting on. And if the king goes to d7, then I take this knight on c4, try to put my knight on e3. And two minor pieces versus a queen, there's some chances to hold. But knight d4 check played, and I think Hikaru is going to figure a way to not allow even that second piece to be captured.
Wow. What an incredible endgame by him. And Robert, you did predict this endgame. Dubov, okay, let's say we're being optimistic. What are Dubov's best chances to have like the most insane save of all time in this position?
King f6 eliminates those possibilities because now there's an issue with queen d1 check. There's an issue with queen h1 check. I think here, so queen c3 check, knight e3. That's how white starts to save a game like this. So you actually have to find the check that allows you to pick up this bishop, and there must be a way. The knight on f5 is also under attack, so just take on g3. Because if you take back with the knight, then I have queen c3 check, winning your bishop. That's the way to do it.
All right, bishop takes, and if you don't take back with the knight, then the king is going to take, so then now it's actually over.
And this one, I mean, look at the evaluation, minus 9.5.
Yeah, that's a pretty comfortable win, I suppose. And we see resignation. I'll update the score sheet.
So 1.5, 1.5. Hikaru Nakamura says that this position, it was one that he had the better side of it throughout this game. And if we just go back, I really felt like somehow Dubov, after g4, he was getting out of things here. g4 was a nice move. And after it takes, bishop takes, knight b6, I mean, we have the evaluation bar here, and my eyes were telling me that Dubov has to be okay here. There's no way he's not doing at least fine here. Bishop g3 was played, knight to h4, and maybe, just maybe, he should have taken this knight on h4 right now, get into an opposite color bishop endgame, and holding that would have been much more doable.
Absolutely, and I'm catching up with you soon, but wow, what a save from Hikaru here. Now they're going to go into the final round. Hikaru with the white pieces, Dubov with black. Do you think either side thinks they're a favorite in Armageddon, and maybe then their strategy is to just play more solidly?
I don't know. Why don't we ask the, 42,000 people in G Hikaru's chat? What do you think?
Yeah, guys. Maybe we should... I see. So 57% of people, the majority, are saying that it's going to be Armageddon.
Oh my gosh. Armageddon. I said earlier, I don't know if I can handle it. That's going to be so intense. But...
yeah, I get nervous even just watching.
For real. And bishop takes h4, right? I mean, the position that we've had on the board here, I really think that Dubov, he could have just taken on h4. After bishop takes h4, you're just saying, all right, let me even play bishop f5. I win your e4 pawn, you win my b2 pawn, but opposite colored bishops, this knight will return into the game, from f4 back over to the queen side. It felt like a really big missed opportunity.
Right. I mean, it was a really tricky endgame, though, regardless. And I think Dubov did try to play it well also, but he was already in time pressure by then just because he had used so much trying to figure out that complicated middle game.
Yeah, I mean, I still felt like white should have really good chances, but I underestimated how strong and how quick black's pawns are moving down the queen side. We get a5, you get a4. And we saw Hikaru create a passed pawn, and this bishop on g3 never got back into the game. So taking that knight on h4 would have eliminated your own worst piece and made an opposite color bishop scenario where would have been harder for black to take control of the light squares.
And I just really loved the plan where he gave up his e pawn in exchange for the b pawn, because at first I didn't understand it until we then saw his future plan with creating that passed pawn. So it was a really beautiful find for Hikaru.
Good understanding is what he just demonstrated, where he just, he made the most he just said, I need to have chances somewhere. And yes, the engine, he didn't have the engine on, of course, but it'll say that
he had the engine in his head.
The engine in his head, the Hikaru engine, the Hikaru mobile. I don't know what to call it, but it was clearly telling him, I'm better here. But just because I'm better doesn't mean I will win this game, and I really want to get this point so that all the pressure isn't on me in the final game. And now it's been flipped. Hikaru gets the white pieces, and the pressure is back on Dubov.
Right. And not to mention that Hikaru also gets to pick what color he gets in Armageddon. Armageddon being 5 minutes for whites, black gets 4 minutes, but if the game is a draw, then it is counted as a win for black. And we've seen Hikaru continuously choosing black because he is so fast and he knows how big of a advantage draws are, that I think Armageddon is also a preference for Hikaru here. So I imagine he's not going to be the one pushing as much just because of his decision to be able to pick what color he plays in Armageddon.
Yeah, it's a big advantage for Hikaru for sure, because he's used to these Armageddons, and when you choose the color, you're clearly choosing the side that you feel like optimizes your winning chances for the match. And I just want to give a shout out again. I see first your dad in my chat saying Hikaru's Twitch channel is getting ready to get the #1 watch channel on Twitch. And that's so cool to see. I mean, it's just so cool. In fact, everybody who's tuning in right now, you're helping that be the case. And invite your friends in here. The chess is fun. We're having a great time. And Hikaru Nakamura, your warlord, is now 1.5 against Daniil Dubov with a Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge title on the line.
Yeah, this is super exciting. I mean, part of me is glad that we're going into the final game just because it adds to the tension. I mean, these two have just been butting heads the entire time, 1-1 already. It's now 1.5 to 1.5. One more game in the current time format, and then it's going to become even faster.
If we get to that Armageddon where, as Alexander told you, 5 minutes for white, 4 minutes for black, but if the game ends in a draw, black gets the victory. So that extra minute, it's very valuable. And at the highest level, there are often draws that are made between players just because they're so evenly matched. But with that extra minute on the clock, not too much time to begin with, it's a tough situation for both players.
Absolutely. So Hikaru is going to get the white pieces next. Do you think he's going to go for a more solid opening or something a bit more risky?
I don't think he's going to take a risk, because we've heard Hikaru come on and say, oh, I look at my chances as not just the next game, but in the overall match, including the Armageddon. He probably feels like he's the favorite in the Armageddon, and if he does something risky, that gives Daniil more chances. So I think that Hikaru should just play his normal approach, play it solidly, and he did just lose with the white pieces against Dubov, right? So we have to remember that.
What about Daniil? Do you think he thinks he's an underdog in the Armageddon and therefore will try to go for something a bit more dangerous with the black side of the pieces, which he was able to beat Hikaru with already?
I think he considers himself more of an underdog with the black pieces in a rapid game than he will in a Armageddon Blitz game.
Okay, that's fair. So we're going to see both sides playing solidly. I think it's fair to say that, a draw is the most likely result between the three. But I'm excited to see what's going to happen regardless.
Yes. So one more game. I'm ready. And you know what I got to do for the chat, which hasn't happened today? So can you ask me a question that's a yes or no, please?
A yes or no question?
Yeah.
What's the hardest yes or no question I could ask you?
Okay, just ask me something basic. Do you like water? Yep. And there goes...
Do you have...
No, it's too late. I asked myself the question.
No.
Took you too long.
No, I wanted to make it really difficult for you.
I just wanted to get the yup going. You see the chat going crazy. Come on, Alexandra. And I got to give a shout out to your channel. I know you don't do any self-promotion here, but Botez Live, if you're not following that channel, I don't know where you've been. Alexandra's doing such great work, such great content. She's also coaching players, other streamers, for the PogChamps event that's coming up soon on chess.com. Starts in 2 days. So, Alexandra, I got to give you a shout out while we're here.
I really appreciate it, Robert. You're far too kind, both in commentary and, in real life. I'm actually...
You're right. Yep.
Oh, I was going to say, because, I moved to New York recently where you've also been living. So it's been nice to be able to see you in person sometimes. Of course, not possible anymore because of COVID, but doing commentary with you has been a real pleasure.
Nope.
Okay, Robert. Well, I'm glad it's the last day.
I just had to say I'm sorry. Didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but
Chad, that was too far. At Robert Hess, too far. Too far.
well, sometimes these things happen.
And chat, we've been making progress on Robert's inactive Instagram account.
Nope.
Some of you guys have been following. It's R Hess 91. He's almost at 5,000 followers. He was less than 1,000. You know, he maybe posts once every 2 years, and it's fun. So R Hess 91, chat. Let's see if we can get him to 5K. That'd be pretty dope.
What if I bring up an embarrassing video of you that I can just go find on YouTube?
What do you mean an embarrassing video of me? That's like basically my entire Twitch stream. What, you think people aren't used to it already?
I just don't want that you embrace it. Now it makes it hard to. You just were showing my edgy photo yesterday, and now I was just trying to come back with something. So I did a little bit of digging. There's just like this video of you from high school answering some questions, and you didn't really.
But Chad already knows that I used to be awkward. I mean, like any older videos you showed me, then people will be like, "Wow, you know, I thought she was weird now, but really she's come so far." So it just makes me look good, Robert.
But used to be awkward, do you mean as of like 12 seconds ago, or do you mean as of like 12 years ago?
It's about the journey, Robert, not the current state. The next game has started. We got Hikaru with the white pieces, and we have another Sicilian.
And I have the game up here. We have a Sicilian where will Hikaru do that thing he did last time? We ended up taking on c6 and had the opportunity to trade queens, and Dubov said no. And we actually have the same exact line, bishop on c4. It's a good piece, gets into the attack quickly. So what do you think about this decision, Alexandra, to repeat the opening line?
I don't know. It makes me think that the players are looking for some kind of Armageddon here. Yeah, this is the exact same position. We saw queen c7 last time, and here we saw f4. Okay, we're going to see it again, Robert. I don't know how I feel about this. I think it was a game where actually both players had chances, so maybe they don't mind repeating it.
Oh, gosh. And give me a second here. They don't mind repeating it. I am just trying to figure out something here. So keep talking. I'm listening.
No worries. Okay, so queen f3, that's what Hikaru played last move. I see him thinking a little bit here. Is he going to potentially consider another plan? No, he plays queen f3. Okay, cool. Well, this is kind of interesting. c5.
Ooh, that's a committal move if I've seen one. It gives up the d5 square here. And
this isn't, so our first deviation is a very strange looking one.
Although maybe Daniil's just trying to go c4 and question this bishop on b3, because the bishop was really strong in the last game and looks strong. So if I can close down the diagonal while attacking your bishop, and then where's the bishop going? Because I'll play a6 and b5 and really try to trap it.
Right, so let's say that Hikaru makes a normal move like castling here. Well, then you have c4, bishop a4, a6, and Dubov is getting the queenside pawn pushes with so many tempos, so that is not ideal. A move like a3 to give his bishop space, well, then his bishop is not going to be passive. So is there anything tactical here? Because Hikaru also has e5 with tempo, and we saw him play e5 in the last game where he had this position. So he does go for it. I like it. And if the knight moves away, can he put a... Oh, okay, c4 instead.
So I was refreshing just because the clocks weren't ticking, and I just wanted to fix that for the relay. And
thanks Robert, for fixing it.
No worries. And so e5, c4. So this is actually similar to what we saw in an earlier type of position when Dubov played b5 and b4. The point is that once this piece is won on f6, I guess he's claiming that this bishop is just trapped. So bishop a4, you can play a move like a6 and then play for b5, or queen a5 directly, trying to remove the guard of the bishop with a bishop takes c3, followed by queen takes a4.
Okay, and I guess it's Dubov's turn to do that. He might go for it. He's certainly not going to take on c3 because he wants to keep his bishop pair here. He does go for queen a5. He's attacking the knight on c3. Can Hikaru just give that knight away? Can he castle out of it, or is he going to lose his bishop on a4?
This is what I call great preparation by Dubov. At least I think so. because he had a tough position the previous time they went for this line. He made a change with c5. Hikaru started thinking, and I mean, we see the trade. So he took on c3, took on a4. White's benefit is the dark squares in front of the black king. If I can play bishop d4 and attack you, that's great. But currently, if we do a material count, black is up one pawn, and these queenside pawns don't exactly look healthy.
Right. So Hikaru has a short-term advantage once again, similar to the last time they played this game, where he has the best attacking chances here because Dubov has weak dark squares, and the dark square bishop and the queen work great together. The pawn on f4 can go for f5. There's a semi-open file next to his king on the e file. So if Hikaru is able to get an attack, it'll be great. But if Dubov is able to hold on like he somehow always manages to and gets into the endgame, that's where he's going to be the one with winning chances.
That's the aim here. And Hikaru's thinking, which I know I was wrong in my assessment of what was happening in the last game, even though I still believe that White was doing perfectly fine there. But right now, both players know exactly what's happening. A draw takes him Armageddon. Hikaru probably doesn't want to take too much risk. You asked me that question before the game started. And there already is inherent risk when you are down one pawn. Your queenside pawns look like this with double isolated C pawns and an isolated A pawn. And this queen on A4, you're a French player, Alexandra. You know positions where you win a pawn and your queen just starts gobbling up on a square like C2. Like, is the attack that strong for White, or is it kind of a bluff?
I mean, it's a really tough question. Bishop d4, I mean, if we're able to get the queen onto h6 or something like that, then I really like Hikaru's chances, but anything in the likes of queen g3, queen h4, queen h6 just feels way too slow because, I mean, I guess Dubov could always play queen e8 and queen f8, so there's actually no checkmate threats. A move like f5 is not going to work to sacrifice because the bishop is able to take it. Queen takes c2, I'm guessing, is way too greedy, Guillermo.
Sometimes gotta say greed is good, right? Wall Street.
It feels okay. All right, Mr. Manhattan.
I'm just quoting Gordon Gekko. Don't blame me. Don't shoot the messenger.
Fair enough. Well, what's the problem with queen takes c2? Because if there's a free pawn, we got to look at what the issue is.
Probably your plan.
Giving two pawns is too suspicious.
Well, you're playing with queen g3, queen h4, and going for the attack. But because black will be ahead by several pawns, rook takes d4 comes to mind. Maybe not immediately, but I'm thinking, can I just sacrifice my rook for this bishop, which makes my king feel a lot safer? And if I'm stealing two pawns first, maybe even a third pawn, that's a lot of material.
Yeah, I actually didn't even think about that sacrifice, but so trading off the rook for a bishop, it's usually not good because it's like you're losing two pawns worth. But Dubov would already be up two pawns, and by taking the bishop, c takes d4 would also give him an extra passed c pawn. So it certainly keeps things interesting. And on top of that, White still has some pawn weaknesses, and Dubov doesn't have any pawn weaknesses in exchange. The position is somewhat closed because there's so many pawns on the board, and the reason that's important is because if you're giving up a rook, you don't want an open position because that's where rooks shine. Rooks shine.
Rooks shine.
Rooks shine.
And
okay, so queen c6.
Yeah, trying to trade the queens. Well, what attack will you have if the queens come off the board? That's what Dubov is asking, and you really won't have an attack. So queen takes c6, b takes c6. Doesn't feel right, even if White's position isn't bad. It just feels like you're not really playing for an initiative. But the real question is, should White be playing for initiative, or is that super risky? I still feel like it's risky, and because Hikaru is the favorite in Armageddon, when he gets to choose his color, that you may want to go down that route. But Armageddon can be a toss-up. It was really what happens in that one single game, and that's a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. So Hikaru maybe doesn't want to trade off the queens there because then he gets into an endgame where both sides have double pawns, but the thing is Dubov has an extra pawn. So in terms of where his queen should go, I always liked queen g3 because it has the queen h4, queen h6 idea in mind. It also is pointing towards the king, so f5 is a threat because bishop takes f5 would immediately lose to rook takes f5. That being said, after queen g3, again, Dubov can always play queen e8, queen f8, worst case situation to defend the dark squares, but maybe he has even more aggressive plays, like bringing the rook to d5 and h5.
I love that move, rook d5, because you're stopping the white's plan of playing f5. Your rook is ready to get maybe doubled on the d file if you can move the bishop and bring the rook out. And it just feels like you're really stopping white's plans before they can even take shape.
Chess.com chat making me laugh again. So guys, you have not infiltrated just Twitch, but also chess.com chat. Somebody is saying Hikaru must win with the wooden shield.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
And this is in chess.com chat, not in Twitch chat, which is why it's even funnier.
So queen e3, hitting e7, trying to get your queen and your bishop lined up on the dark diagonal here. So do I play rook e8 for Dubov? Do I play queen e6, trying to trade off the queens in that manner? Do I play queen d6? Do I play queen e8, as you were mentioning before? I don't love queen e8 just right now, because I feel like I'm getting super passive. And with the bishop on d4, queen on e5, the queen f8 sort of holding down against the checkmate won't work, as the h8 square is also one where my queen wants to go to.
Right. Well, I like these plans that you're pointing out with moves like queen d6, because if Dubov can trade off queens, he's very happy here. It's certainly tricky to figure out how to do it, but if you were Dubov, would you be willing to lose, say, your e-pawn in exchange for trading off queens? So a move like queen e5, queen f6.
Okay, so like let's make a move. It's a good question. So queen e5, queen f6, and we trade on the square. I think I would be, because while the black king doesn't look totally safe, it is really difficult for the rooks to infiltrate, as I have my back rank defended. This bishop on f5 will hit the c2 pawn. So because of white's weak pawns, I think that black is okay giving up the pawn if that means the queens come off the board.
Got it. And that's an important question, because now Dubov played bishop f5. The idea being, if Hikaru plays queen e5, then he's willing to play queen f6 here. And on top of playing queen f6 here, he would also be putting pressure on the c2 pawn.
That's right. So bishop f5 was definitely a good move. Queen takes e7, you can steal that pawn off. But the problem now is, not only is white attacking with this bishop on d4, can't black play rook e8 and try to go rook e2 and do the same thing that white's trying to do and checkmate on the g2 square?
Mm-hmm. Okay, queen e5. I was about to say queen f6 is forced, but I guess you could also play f6 here. But then you're giving up the e7 pawn and you're not trading queens. It feels very icky.
Yes, it does. But you can still do that, actually. So, like, let's say f6, queen takes e7, rook e8. I don't think black has anything to worry about after this move, because if you move your queen away, instead, you should take on f6, but then we trade queens off, and then I'm going to win your c2 pawn. I think we just end up in an opposite colored bishop position where there are some attacking chances for white, so I don't want to make it sound like it's just game over. But trading queens off will make the black king feel that much safer, especially with if the rooks come off next, and opposite colored bishop endgame with just the bishops will be an easy hold for black.
Yeah, that's fair. So if Dubov is going for a draw, there's that option. Do you think f6 means he's happy with a draw, queen f6 means he's going for a win?
That's a great question, and I'm trying to get in the mind of Daniil Dubov, and he plays queen f6. I think he is just trying to say, you have to prove that this is actually just a complete equality. Black is the one who's better here. Even material currently, the pawn structure is a problem for white, and this bishop on f6 looks really good, but you're not actually going to checkmate me.
Yeah, that's a very good point here. I mean, he's always going to have to be careful about it, but eventually Dubov will be able to push the h-pawn, get his king to h7, so at least he doesn't have to worry about back rank checkmates. And I mean, he has a lot of compensation in exchange for the weak king, or even f6 at some point, kicking that bishop out.
Well, because I want to play f6, I'm thinking of rook a6. Why don't I keep your rook tied down on a1? He plays rook e6, trying to go for the open file. But no matter what, this rook can swing over to a6 at a moment's notice, and his pawn a2 is a problem. And look at the evaluation. Dubov has a better position with now, I don't think, any risk here to lose, and he can just slowly press this. And yes, Hikaru likely will not get in any danger, but it just isn't the way you want to play your fourth and final game, potentially heading into an Armageddon.
Right. Okay, so you're Hikaru. you realize you're worst here. And in terms of trying to figure out how to play for a draw, I guess what you have in exchange for your poor pawn structure is that extra semi-open b file. So what he can try to do is play a move like rook b1 and try to tie down Dubov's rooks as well in defense of his pawns that aren't necessarily weak, but he has to defend them because he's lacking the semi-open file.
And rook a b1 will hit b7. I'll probably just push my pawn because you're right. You want to tie black's rooks down, but I can just play b6, and now my pawn is protected by another pawn, and the rook is here for good measure. And I'm going to play f6. I'm going to bring my rook from a8 into maybe e8 and take over the open file in addition to putting pressure on your c2.
This position is hard to play as white. Every time I try to suggest things, I mean, black's plan is just a lot more straightforward because black basically has one weakness, right? His king side. So the f6 pawn move makes a ton of sense, and then activating his rooks. Hikaru really has to be on the defensive here, and that's why he plays rook f2, just take care of c2.
And Hikaru really wants to trade off the rooks because let's say these rooks come off, and even if white loses the c2 pawn in the process there, it's still going to be a draw with best play because opposite colored bishops just have this tendency. Now, that's a long ways away, and Dubov isn't going to be so accommodating, but that's what Hikaru will want to achieve, even though it's not likely to get to that point.
Right, and I love how you're always thinking in terms of what is the end goal here. So if Hikaru's going for a draw, his best chances are to trade off pieces and go into a theoretically drawn endgame. So even just keeping that plan in the back of his mind is going to be helpful. He goes for a4. Okay, so this is a little bit aggressive. Is it in his favor to try to trade some of the queenside pawns off?
It is, because black's pawns are connected on a7 and b7, and white's are not connected. There's this double isolated pawn, the isolated a pawn. So if black wants to play b6 to meet rook to b1, which attacks the square, then white always has a5 move, where you start with a5. And the point is that I would like to trade to create a potential weakness in black's queenside.
Yeah, I like that, because then it's going to give Hikaru play as well. As we mentioned, Dubov got rid of one of his weaknesses, which was the king safety. So if Hikaru can create some counterplay, interesting. So rook e8, the reason I'm surprised is because a7 is no longer protected.
Yeah, maybe this is just agreeing on a draw.
Huh.
That was strange to me.
I really thought Dubov was going to push a little bit more.
I think he should have pushed. That move caught me off guard here because he just gave up his a7 pawn, and then now he hasn't moved yet. So I wish I knew what to say. That's just the pawn.
Maybe an idea is something like rook e1, rook c1, and then he's going to get c2, but I mean, it doesn't matter. It was already a doubled pawn. It wasn't really doing much over there.
Oh, it's just shaking hands. Once you do something like this, and you, even if white loses the a4 pawn and the c2 pawn, and we're actually already in the end game, so you can see this happen, you won't even lose the a pawn. But my point was that you could just put this bishop on b4, and opposite colored bishops, nothing you can do to challenge your opponent's piece. We are getting Armageddon, Alexandra.
Are you ready for the excitement, chat? Armageddon going down to the wire, the very final game. Yeah, so opposite colored bishop endgame. Even if one side had an extra pawn, this would still be a draw. That simplified a lot faster than we could. I'm excited to talk to Hikaru in the interview and see what he thought about this endgame. But draw agreed. Chat, it's going into Armageddon. Can we get some hype in the chat? I mean, this is the closest thing we're going to get during COVID to like a super sports finale. So let's get some hype, even though we're not in a stadium.
I feel like we're about to get a wave going on. Like all, like you said in the sports game, everyone does the wave just to celebrate.
Do 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 do.
Keep going.
There you go, non-copyrighted music.
I was enjoying the music there.
I'm doing my best, Robert. Okay, so we're going into Armageddon. I think we're both pretty confident in the fact that Hikaru was going to pick the black pieces. He beat Dubov with the black pieces. He's been choosing the black pieces over and over again. He's fast with his clock, and draw odds, meaning that if the game is a draw, he wins, is just so favorable here.
Well, he's definitely going to choose black. He chose black against Magnus Carlsen, which means he's confident that he will not lose in this single game. But I mean, Dubov has been getting some impressive positions in some of the games, but I think it's the right choice. And Alexandra, you ask me the difficult questions. I'm getting you this time. What would you put the odds at in this match?
60-40 for Hikaru. I think he's a favorite in terms of rating. Not that Dubov can't pull it off. Before, maybe it would have been like 55-45. But because he gets to pick and he has draw odds and he's done so well in Armageddon, I think it's fair to give him that.
Okay.
And chat, feel free to write what you guys actually think it is.
Yeah, it's not easy to know what the percentages should be. We're not making odds, but we're just trying to figure out what the, what realistically what it's like. And I need to do something really quickly here.
I see a lot of people in Hikaru's chat putting 100-0. Well, that's because you guys are fans, and honestly, I respect it. I think watching any type of game and having an emotional stake or cheering for a player makes it so much more exciting. Like if I were to watch, I mean, even watching Hikaru, obviously we know him better than Dubov, but I don't want to take anything away from Dubov. So let's say I was watching my sister play or someone I really care about. Oh, the pressure is so intense.
It's true. It is intense, and it's difficult, but Hikaru and Dubov, they are able to do this. So you said 60%, and I just want everybody to enjoy what's going on right now as we wait for the action to take place.
I can't. Oh my gosh! Look at me when I was young. Aww. Do you like that Canadian flag over that gold medal though?
Oh gosh, had to do it.
What's weird? I'm wearing a bandana, but I'm not using it to hold the hair out of my face. I just thought it looked cool to have that extra color over.
I mean, I'm just trying to see exactly what's going on here. I had to blow this up a little bit. You kind of seem like not thrilled, but you just won, didn't you?
Yeah, I remember that. That was when I won the North American Championship for girls my age. But I just felt so awkward carrying the flag. But my dad was like, "You gotta take it. You gotta do it for Canada." And I think I kind of tripped on my way up there, so I was embarrassed. But good times.
Oh, great times. Just never been so good. Well, we'll bring you back here.
Yeah. Very, very, very questionable.
You thought that I wouldn't hit you with the payback, didn't you?
I don't know. I see improvement. I mean, at least I'm not wearing bright yellow bandanas over my head anymore.
Somebody's asking me a question in my chat, and I know exactly why they're asking it. They go, "Are you familiar with the quote, 'Efficiency is intelligent laziness'?" And that's because that was the quote I used in my high school yearbook, which means somebody in the chat has my high school yearbook photo somewhere.
No, that's such a nice quote, though. And I've heard it so many times. Definitely a mantra to live by.
How did they get it?
I don't know.
Oh, someone posted it in the live stream fails post? Oh, come on.
Actually, one of my friends found an old photo of me, too, and sent it to me. And oh my gosh, my hair is so wild all the time. Chat, I saw Robert's hair. I'm actually going to... Wait, let me see if I can see where the camera is. I don't even see my Zoom call. Anyway, I'm going to assume you guys can see. But look at this hair, chat. Look at this hair. I don't know, Robert. Is this as crazy as your hair?
Wait,
or
that's
less
you?
Crazy? That's me, yeah.
No, it's not.
Yes. Yes, it is.
What? Are you kidding? That's not you.
No, that is me, and that is my natural hair texture.
What? I'm in disbelief. That's not you.
No, you know what? If I leave my hair and I don't style it, that's what it looks like now too. So maybe I should just... But last time, I streamed once with my natural hair, and people kept calling me a crazy lady. I don't know why, but having more wild hair gives people that vibe. So I just, decided to style it nowadays.
I guess you said they're calling you a crazy lady?
Yeah. That's what my chat kept spamming. It's like, why does Alex look more insane than usual today? So, peer pressured into styling my hair.
I think it's because you weren't doing Botez Gambits that day. So
That's fair.
people ask for an explanation of Armageddon, so we will explain that once again. So in Armageddon, the side that gets the black pieces has 4 minutes in the clock. The side with the white pieces gets 5 minutes. So that's a clear advantage, a full extra minute in a blitz game for white. And in return for that minute, black gets draw odds. So if the game ends in a draw, it counts as a win for the player with the black pieces. And that's that.
Pretty straightforward. And once again, the reason why Hikaru gets to pick what color he gets is because in qualifying, originally for the semifinals, he was the top ranked finisher ahead of Dubov. So one of the advantages is at least being able to pick Armageddon.
So I'm going to do you a solid here, Alexandra. Give me a second. And
all right.
You'll see what's going to happen. I'm going to embarrass myself a little bit. That cool?
Yay!
That cool? Because
of course.
Of course it's okay for me to embarrass myself.
Oh, and I'm going to update the score in the meantime. Thanks for letting me know, chat.
Give me a sec as I do this. Oh gosh, I can't believe I'm showing this photo.
Okay, chat, the score is updated. Thanks for letting us know. We are waiting for the Armageddon match. It hasn't started just yet.
Is that what we're waiting for?
The winner of Armageddon is going to be the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge champion.
Are you ready for this image, Alexandra?
Yes, Edgy Hess.
Oh, this is an Edgy Hess. This is Athletic Hess. So here we go.
It's going to be a little delayed for me, so I haven't seen it yet.
Oh my gosh.
I'm still waiting. Oh,
oh, you know.
Oh my gosh. I love how you brought your chess set out on the field.
It wasn't my choice, okay? They were doing an article and they wanted to... I'm taking this away.
It's always your choice, Robert. You agreed to have that photo. I feel like you're the kind of guy who's like, I'm either going to beat you up on the field. If not, I'll beat you up on the board. And if you get lucky, I'll do both, yo.
Yo. But aren't you glad that in addition to showing old photos of you, you know,
but you know, Robert, I feel like I got more cool and you also got more cool. You're awesome, Robert.
Okay, that's not where you were originally going to go with that, but you did change your tune. I could hear it as you changed your voice there. So I appreciate the fake compliment, and even though you didn't mean it.
No, I did mean it. I wanted to be real for a second there.
Oh gosh. When's this next game beginning? That way I can stop embarrassing both of us.
Yeah, is there anything else we should share before? Maybe one last, PogChamps is happening. Where can they watch it? Type of information before it starts.
We can definitely do that. We can talk about a little PogChampy Champ. We start that June 5th, and it goes all the way through June 19th. That's the group stages through the final. It's going to be a ton of fun, and we have so many great participants.
And I just want to point out, it's going to be on twitch.tv/chess. That's chess.com's channel. They're hosting it. So if you guys haven't followed yet and you want to make sure that you're catching the action, do make sure to follow.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Robert. Didn't mean to cut you off there.
It's okay, but I was actually about to show who's the coach, and then you started being like, I need to give you all the information of where to find it because the coach is none other than you.
Yay, Coach Botez. And like I mentioned, it's honestly been a pleasure to be able to coach again. I coached for a really long time before I was streaming and before college. So it's just been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me, chess.com.
And the Warlord is the host. That's Hikaru Nakamura. Oh,
yes,
and we have
look
liftoff.
at that smirk. Look at that smirk. That is such a good photo of Hikaru.
All right, I see the game is about to take place. We can't miss a single second. Hikaru chooses the black pieces. Let me actually pull up the game very quickly underneath. So,
not surprised to see Hikaru choose the dark pieces at all. That's what we were expecting here. We have a king's pawn game here with a fianchetto on the king side. And that's a little bit unique because the pawn on the center is blocking the light squared bishop. What are your thoughts on Dubov's opening choice?
I think he's just trying to play very quickly, and that way there are no trades. It won't make Hikaru's life easier because not a single piece has been traded. No pawn trades are being offered right now. F4 comes to mind, but of course you can't play F4 with your king on G1. So king H1, pawn F4, these type of moves are what Danilo wants to play, or even bishop E3. And if we trade on E3, then my rook on F1 has a semi-open file.
Right, so Hikaru wants to play quickly to get back the 1 minute he's down, and he also wants to play solidly because if the game is a draw, that is a win for him. So his opening choice makes a ton of sense so far.
And Dubov, let me refresh really quickly. I see that the time isn't ticking. It's just a relay thing. let me refresh. And okay, we have the live board. So h3 play, but after quite a substantial think by Dubov.
Yeah, it was surprising that he took so long already. I mean, he still has like a 40-second time advantage. Hikaru also playing h6. He doesn't want to allow Dubov's bishop to go to g5. Not worth dealing with that pin. And now that he doesn't have to worry about the pin, he goes for d5, creating a pawn break in the center. If e takes d5, he'll capture back with his knight, and he's happy to trade off all those minor pieces because, again, it increases his chances of keeping a position that's at least a draw.
That's true. So I think Dubov is going to start with f4 here, and that way he doesn't trade off all of the minor pieces, but now he's going to trade a knight. The knight on d5 has to leave after knight takes f4, and the bishop on g2 does feel more powerful.
Yeah, and I like this by Dubov. It's a little bit wild because he's pushing a pawn near his king, but at the same time, it also creates problems for Hikaru, who, if he castles on the king side, he's going to have to deal with his semi-open f-file and some potential attacks. If he castles on the queen side, then, I mean, Dubov will be able to push his pawns there as well, and Dubov's king isn't actually in that much danger with the way he's boxed it up in the corner.
Whoa, what just happened? It's completely winning? Look at that. Oh my gosh, the bishop on c5 is lost. That's the problem here, is if bishop e6 takes, f takes, bishop queen h5 check, wins the bishop on c5.
Oh, that is so painful. Okay, so knight f takes d4. It still doesn't look like he's winning a piece right away, but the problem is he's going to get his queen onto h5, attacking the bishop and the f7 square at the same time because of the open f-file.
And he's winning the piece. He could have taken on d5 directly, but I think Dubov has found a way to win a piece, and I see the entire Hikaru chat just, screaming and hoping for their warlord here. But after queen h5, this bishop has nowhere to go. If it goes to c6, then knight e6 happens because the pawn f7 is pinned to the king. If you castle kingside, down goes this bishop on d5. If you play g6, I have queen e5, hitting your rook on h8, keeping the pressure on the bishop on d5. And it looks like Dubov has found a way tactically to win a piece.
And what happened here? Was this part of Dubov's opening preparation? Because he did take some time here. Or did Hikaru just blunder?
I think this moment, I mean, we'll go back to it after the game concludes, but there was this moment where he took on d5 and then went f4. I mean, that was a really critical spot there. And now knight takes d5. He takes with a c knight because here comes knight e6. The pawn on f7 is pinned to the king. Oh man, just which do you take? Do you take g7? Do you take f7? Do you take both? I think I would take f7 here.
Yeah, I mean, taking f7 with check is always more tempting because then you can always take g7 after. I guess both are checks. But bringing your queen into a king that is underdeveloped looks tempting. Both are good. He takes on g7 instead. Hikaru's king in the center of the board. I mean, Hikaru is only down a pawn right now. Okay, obviously the engine is tripping and saying it's like +6, which is probably right because tactically f7 is also hanging. But, it's almost lost, but there's still some hope here.
And there's also a move like d4. You can't take me on d4 because queen g4 check. Like the king is in all sorts of danger on d7. So many tactics available. Bishop f4 is a move that develops the bishop, hits the queen. Whoa. What just... All moves coming in at once. Rook f7, rook f8, bishop f4 played, hitting this queen, takes on f7, wins the queen. And now we have a position where black has some outside chances because of an attack that could pick up some steam on the king on h1, but realistically, you look at the engine evaluation, completely winning for white. So this king on c6, weaker than the king on h1 for now, but there are some chances here for Hikaru.
Right, because it's also a game with no increment, so that is where you see the wildest swings in evaluation because you don't get any extra time. So sometimes you play too quickly and you make a serious blunder.
And knight d4 check, and actually the eval bar just went down completely there. I mean, it's still very good for white, but it was much higher. Queen to d7 comes to mind, but I don't know if I want to move my queen away from the defense of my king. So rook e2, that's a really strong move. Trading off a pair of rooks makes your king feel safer.
Right, and Dubov is the side with more material here, so the more he trades, it's going to get simpler for him. But there are some endgames where black can hold with a bishop and a rook versus a queen. It's not this endgame so far, but at least Hikaru knows that he still has that shot, and he's playing very quickly.
He needs to play quickly because he's down a little bit on time. His position is bad, but as you said, there are opportunities to make a draw or to keep this king under threat. If this rook on f6 could just teleport to d1, then there's a big attack on this king. But as soon as you move your rook away from f1 to say b1, white has rook f2 trying to trade off these rooks. So here's c3 played by Dubov. And I don't know, it feels just like Dubov doesn't see a clear knockout. And if that's the case, and Hikaru can manage to keep him even on the clock or even get ahead on the clock, then Dubov's chances are really starting to lessen.
Right, but one big issue for Hikaru is his king on b6, and that's why Dubov plays b4. He's taking away the a5 square, the c5 square. He has moves like queen g7, where if Hikaru blocks with the rook, then the pawn on h6 is hanging. If he goes back to b6, well, then his king can only stay on b6 and go to b5, so he's starting to have much fewer safe squares.
And so it goes rook f7, and Dubov doing extremely well in the clock right now. He is about 15 seconds ahead. Queen takes h6. He's now, what is the material count? White has 6 pawns, and black 3. So it's a queen and 3 pawns for a rook and a bishop that's clearly dominant for white here. And he plays d4, shutting off this bishop. And now white can actually push the pawns from the king. That can increase the risk, because if you push pawns, they're open diagonals potentially for this bishop. But with these extra pawns, even if you say get rook g7, rook takes g3, you're actually transitioning into a losing rook endgame.
Right, because Dubov is up so much time that even if you simplify for something like that, he's still going to end up losing. But both players under 50 seconds on the clock. It is a bullet game, so there's still some wild options that might happen. Dubov instead going to open Hikaru's king instead of risking anything and pushing his kingside pawns himself.
It's a really smart move, b5, because this rook can swing to b2, this queen over to b5. It's just, it's essentially defending your king by attacking your opponent's king. And now there has to be a knockout. You can take on a4 with check. I think queen to c8 check was also promising. He brings his queen over here. Rook e7 check, that's it. Oh, it's black's move, okay. So black move.
e7 check still works here, though.
Queen.
Oh no, and queen b5, I mean, Hikaru's about to lose that extra bishop on c7, and Dubov's king on g2, if it's ever checked on f7, can escape to h3, so no perpetual hope either.
And that tactic, rook takes c7, now queen c5, queen takes f8, and Dubov has won the game. And with it, he has won the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. I know there's so many Hikaru Nakamura fans rooting on their favorite chess player, but Daniil Dubov proved that he came back from a 1-0 match deficit. He won the second match, a very close one, and he has won this third one in a time scramble. So Daniil Dubov, I mean, he's a champ.
He is. I mean, he was the former 2018 world rapid champion, and he proved again why. The way he's able to play these short time formats is just incredible. He finds these really tricky openings that, Hikaru and other players would be able to understand better in classical long time controls, but they are so hard and unfamiliar to figure out with so little time on the clock.
And there's still so many people here, so many fans, maybe disappointed that Hikaru Nakamura was not able to win the overall tournament, but you got to give him a shout out. He beat Magnus Carlsen in their semifinal matchup. He was the number 1 seed heading in to this knockout portion, into the bracket. And Daniil Dubov, tip your cap off to that guy. People didn't really know him, even though
maybe we could pull up his card again as we talk about him.
And we might have to add to his card, because we had his card. We were showing that, this guy is a monster. But in addition to his previous accomplishments, a world rapid champion in 2018, he just won the Lindores Abbey Rapid ahead of Hikaru, ahead of Magnus Carlsen, ahead of Ding Liren. He beat Karyakin, Ding Liren, and Hikaru on his path to this championship. You got to give the guy your praise here.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we feel for Hikaru. We know you're his fans, and hey, he still beat Magnus. He'll come back in the future. But until then, this is also Dubov's moment to shine. So huge congratulations and nothing but respect for him.
And it's just, after 2 days in this event, he was at the bottom of the standings, and he came back. He barely qualified. And not only did he qualify, but he was able to win this event. So he's the comeback kid.
Yeah, and I'm getting a note that Hikaru is actually going to be joining us. So give me 1 second to send him the link.
Okay. And
right. Okay.
We'll get Hikaru. We'll hear his thoughts in just a minute.
Yeah, so send it to him where he'll join shortly. But yes, guys, so stay tuned. Hikaru is going to do an interview, which is always hard to do after a loss, especially a loss that is the one that would have counted for the championship title. But it's nice to see that he's humble and he's going to do it regardless.
And we bring up Hikaru, who will be hosting the PogChamps event. And of course, Hikaru has been so generous to have us on his channel throughout this with our coverage. And the PogChamps event will be great. It will be certainly be a fun event. And we are about to have Hikaru. Let me just continue setting. I'm here. Aha. So, Hikaru, a tough match. Sorry it didn't go your way.
Are we live already?
We're live. You came right in there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I'd look at it is, in terms of the final game, it's all kind of random. It depends what the opening is. The fact that somehow in the Armageddon game, I managed to get into an end game where we both had like 30 seconds was pretty miraculous because you might want to change the scene, by the way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to edit. You came so quickly that I was trying to edit Alexandra's. You made me rush, and now I didn't get everything taken care of. But anyway, sorry. I'll change the scene in a sec as I edit it. Keep talking.
Yeah. Okay. So all right. Okay.
we can also hold for a second so that your fans can see you talking. You had almost 50,000 people watching today, by the way, if you just want to give them a shout out for their love.
Yeah, of course. Of course, big shout out to everybody who watched. It didn't go my way. I think really in terms of the match, I mean, yesterday, of course, when I lost the first game with White, certainly put me in a bad spot. I had some chances maybe yesterday in the fourth game to come back and force an Armageddon, but today, again, more of the same. I felt I kind of lost objectivity. I was probably winning in the second game with White, and then when I completely messed it up, I didn't force the draw.
I got you now. Sorry, I had to.
Okay, there we go. Okay, good, cool. All right, yeah. So I mean, I guess what I would say is like today, for example, in the second game, I was probably winning out of the opening, and then I kind of made a couple of inaccuracies, and it was basically gone. But like yesterday, I couldn't really control my urge to keep playing on. I don't really know why, but I just felt this need to not make a draw, and it really cost me. I lost that second game, and then somehow I won this third game. I don't really know how, because I suspect at some point I probably was completely lost. But really, I mean, by the end of today, I didn't have much energy, and in this final game, I confused a move order. I played this H6 move. I played D5 right away. It's something I looked at some time ago. But then yeah, I mean, I basically was lost, and I kind of wanted to resign, but somehow Danil didn't actually put me away in an orderly fashion. And then it kind of, I think maybe a couple of moves, maybe I had some faint hopes of holding a draw possibly if I didn't hang this H6 pawn deep in the end game. Of course, objectively, it was busted. I mean, out of the opening. What happened is I just confused my move order, and in an Armageddon game especially, yeah, like somewhere around here, it had to be winning like immediately, and Danil didn't. Yeah, actually, it was winning. So I played King C6, and then. So King C6 is what I played, right?
Yep.
And then he played Knight E6, was it?
He did.
Right. And then what did I play? I played Rook F6, I think. Yeah, and he missed. I think Queen A4 here just ends the game immediately with no fireworks, if I'm not mistaken. So I think Queen A4, King B6. There's some. I saw something here that just wins on the spot. But anyway, I mean, it doesn't really. Oh, I think it was Queen A4, King there. Maybe it was Queen. Yeah, it was Queen D4 check, King C6, and then he has this really nice tactic. Just so I can show you guys. Mm-hmm. So Queen D4, King C6, and he's this really nice in between move, Knight to F4, which cuts the two rooks off, and just ends the game on the spot. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, I was quite happy after the second game that somehow I pulled it together and won the third game and got to the Armageddon, because certainly it was not good. Let's put it that way. What happened in the second game. So yeah, I mean, I fought back, made the Armageddon, and as I said, in an Armageddon situation, a lot depends on the opening. I think if you're playing with the black pieces specifically, and your opponent doesn't do something very creative at the start, and you get to like move 15 or move 20, where you're not really in a bad position, then I think generally the odds are in your favor. If you get tricked in the opening, that's generally the most dangerous phase in the Armageddon game, and I kind of mix up a move order, and yeah, I mean, it just happens. But again, I'm not super upset, because I felt that overall I played reasonably well, especially both in the Magnus match to come back, and then today after losing the second game to find a way to force the Armageddon. I'm quite happy that I did that. Because again, even if the Armageddon didn't go my way, just getting there, all things considered, after really messing it up yesterday and then really starting off poorly today, it's good. And it happens. But Danil played well, I think. He played very well when he had his opportunities, when I kind of lost the thread in a couple of the games, both yesterday and today. And so definitely credit to him for winning. And I'm sure I'll have a chance to play against him in the final event, I think, next one, and maybe also the final grand event as well. So it's not that big of a deal. And you just move on and have other things are coming up. So plenty of stuff to look forward to.
Speaking of playing him again in the future, is there anything you would change in how you base your strategy on facing him?
Not particularly. I think the main thing is just be objective. I mean, the reason that I lost this match was that I was not objective at the critical moments, both yesterday and the first white game, where I kind of started drifting in the game. I didn't make a draw like I should have. I just started drifting and making random moves. And then today also in the second game with white, when I was very, very close to winning, I think around like move 20 or something. And then once I lost the thread, I still couldn't find a way to be objective. And I felt this insane need to keep pushing to try and win the game. And so yeah, I think the main thing is just remembering the match situation and trying to be objective. And I wasn't at a couple critical moments and it cost me, but I think the fact that it was an Armageddon, anything can really happen. So it's all good.
Yeah, and in some ways, did this remind you of your match against Magnus? Because you lost the first match against Magnus and then won 2 straight. And then Danilo sort of had the momentum after losing the first match to you, and he won yesterday. And did that play at all in your mind, or was that just kind of irrelevant?
Not really, I would say. I think I wasn't really thinking about that. More than anything, I was just trying to just trying to play good chess. I really felt that on the first day I played decent chess. I wouldn't say it was great chess. I thought it was decent. It was good enough because Danil made some blunders. But yesterday was definitely not good. And today, I mean, I had my moments where I played very well, but I also didn't play well. So I think the main thing is trying to just play well. And obviously, when you're playing endless games every day, it seems like now in various tournaments, it's going to catch up with you. So I think the main thing is just trying to play good chess and do what you can. But Danil had his opportunities, and he was better at capitalizing on them than I was. So definitely he deserved to win.
Well, I really respect your attitude, even dealing with a loss like this. And I see a lot of people in chat are putting hashtag still my warlord.
I mean, I guess I'll put it this way. If I had lost a match like I probably should have in 4 games, like let's say Danil wins the second game and he basically doesn't lose the third game with white, and say the fourth game ends in a draw, I think I would be much more unhappy. As I've said many times, I think the most critical thing when you're playing in match especially is to keep trying. Even when you're behind, if it doesn't work out, that's one thing, but always trying to find a way to come back. And I think both in the match against Magnus and this match as well, today, and even yesterday, actually, the fourth game, really, to me, that means a lot. Because again, there are going to be more opportunities. You're not always going to win. You're not always going to lose. Well, most of the time, except when I play Magnus. But nonetheless, I think that it's just kind of always trying to do your best and come back. And for me, that means a lot more than actual objective result. The fact that I was able to do that. So I'm not thrilled that I didn't win the event, but I'm not super upset either.
Well, you have the PogChamps upcoming where you're hosting. When's the next time that people can watch you play in a tournament?
Well, I mean, originally I think I was supposed to be playing in a tournament starting tomorrow, the St. Louis tournament, but I do have some coaching to do. So, I'll give you guys, since some people saw this event, but some people did not see it. There was an event in between, or not in between, but during this Lindores Abbey tournament. It was the St. Louis tournament called Clutch Chess. And, what I learned from that event was basically I was streaming in the morning, and then I tried to play it in the afternoon. And, that really didn't work well. Like, pardon my English, but I played Wesley, and he basically kicked my ass pretty soundly. So because of that, I'm trying to sort of cut back a little bit and not play this next St. Louis event, and focus instead on the PogChamps. And I see a bunch of people in chat writing language. But basically, just to sort of focus on the PogChamps. Obviously, the past month and a half and 2 months have been really amazing on Twitch. Just to see the growth of chess. Seeing everyone playing, I mean, I think for me yesterday was really when it kind of hit home, the fact that of all people, I saw Tyler 1 play a game on stream. I was thinking, I've seen to myself that out of all the people that I've seen play chess, he's probably like the least likely, I would think. I mean, I honestly, out of everyone that I've seen on Twitch, I assume people like Tyler One or Tief were probably the two most unlikely guys that I'd ever expect to see playing chess. And the fact that I saw Tyler playing a game on stream yesterday really shows just how far we've come in terms of both popularizing the game and making it fun for a lot of streamers to play. So yeah, I'm just really grateful for everything, and of course I'll be live very soon. I'm not going to take 2 days off. That'd be like unacceptable. So everybody will see me very soon, and just keep going forward, and look and just do a bunch of lessons and do the commentary on PogChamps and just chill.
It's great to see that you're managing to balance Twitch and your professional chess career. So thank you so much for chatting with us today. And we know you'll go back live on your channel soon with your usual post match analysis.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll see everybody very soon.
All right. Thanks, Hikaru.
Good job, you guys. Great commentary. Keep it up.
Appreciate
it. Jinx.
Well, Hikaru Nakamura will be hosting the PogChamps event, which begins in just 2 days from now. So, Alexandra, we heard his final thoughts. A disappointing finish, but Dubov deserves credit, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Hikaru was dealing with the loss very gracefully. And PogChamps will be super exciting. So Hikaru will be hosting it. Chess.com will also be having commentary of the actual events. We showed quite a few of the players. Is there anyone else you want to show, Robert, before we switch off with Hikaru?
Well, I mean, we have, of course, players like BoxBox competing, and BoxBox has really been making progress. I saw Hikaru teaching BoxBox late last night, so clearly dedicated to the growth of the game. And BoxBox, he was playing against Choco Bars, who is also taking part. And I don't know, Alexandra, you know these players. Oh, I didn't actually cut to the scene. This is me. I'm scuffing it this time, but Choco Bars, BoxBox. I mean, you're the one who's more familiar with the players. Can you give your overall take of what's about to happen in a couple days from now?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, I think it's going to be a combination of time spent training until the event as well as prior experience. So for example, we have streamers like Voyboy, who used to play as a kid, who's starting off at a 1700 rating, so he's going to be a heavy favorite. But then you have other streamers like BoxBox who maybe they started at 1,000, but they've been putting in some serious hours and taking the most advantage of the coaching available to catch up as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and it's going to be a 2-week long event. So I guess these players have all been playing for a while now. They've been streaming online, and over the course of those 2 weeks, what do you expect to see? I mean, there's just a lot that we're going to see, but good chess. Do we think you're going to see trash talk?
I would be entertained to see some trash talk. In the coaching sessions, obviously, everybody has been pretty respectful, but I think a little, friendly drama back and forth always makes the game more entertaining without hurting any feelings.
That's true. And I think these players, they're used to streaming, they're used to playing their games while talking, so it will be fun to see. But on that note, Alexandra, I think we're going to sign off, and it's our last show together for at least the time being.
Well, hopefully we'll make more shows together in the future, more commentary. Hikaru will be switching on in just a few minutes, so stay tuned, chat, if you want to see the analysis from his point of view. Don't forget, Robert does commentary on twitch.tv/GMHess. He's been streaming most of these days during COVID, so go show him some love. Thanks so much for being an awesome partner.
My pleasure. And with that, Hikaru will start streaming. We're going to sign off. I'll be online in the next couple of days, probably with the next Clutch Chess tournament, and you will be busy with PogChamps. But without further ado, we got to go.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. You guys made this amazing.
See you, everybody.